Loco Trail. Chapter 1. At that magic sunset hour, the whole world seemed to hold its breath, brooding under the weight of the day's heat. The obsidian cliffs, sharp enough to cut the sky, had lost their glitter, and the harshness of Lava Pinnacle and Sawtooth Ridge was being swallowed by a wash of fading gold. A violet haze, thick as smoke, enveloped the turbulent barrens that swooped downward and eastward like a raw, crumbling edge into space. Beyond that gap, a mighty, rough-edged shadow advanced across the valley floor, a tide of darkness coming to claim the land. At a point where the canyon wall broke sharply into those shadowed depths, two men sprawled on a heat-withered ledge. They were as motionless as a pair of lizards baking on a rock, their boots pointed toward the dying sun, their faces turned toward the gap. Rifles, greasy from use, and tin canteens lay beside them in the dust. A small graveyard of cigarette stubs littered the tough, wiry grass at their elbows. Invisible from the trail below, they watched a lone horseman approach from the plains. Frail and tiny the rider looked from this height, a solitary speck of life threading its way through savage dimensions. Yet, through the crystal-clear air, every detail about him was plain. His horse was a black, clean-limbed animal, all muscle and power. The man was traveling heavy, a blanket roll, full saddlebags, and a rifle snug in its scabbard. He sat the saddle with an easy, seasoned grace, looking as if he were molded to his mount. The soft clop of his horse's hooves echoed between the enclosing walls, the only sound in the vast silence. "What do you make of him, Slick?" the shorter of the two lookouts inquired, his voice a soft rasp. The raw-boned youth with the bristling jaw didn't reply right away. His eyes were glued to a pair of powerful field glasses, the metal hot against his skin. He studied the horseman for another long moment, then laid the glasses aside and picked up his rifle, the stock warm and familiar in his hands. "Cannot figure him," he said, his voice flat. "He is not a peace officer. He would know the pass was guarded, and that he was signing his own death warrant by riding in so bold." He paused, squinting. "He is not a cowhand looking for strays, not with that much gear. Probably a stranger, the kind that rushes in where angels feared to tread." Either way, he slid a cartridge gently into the breech, the click of metal loud in the quiet. "We will singe his whiskers. That is what we will do." "How come you hog all the excitement?" the other man, Yakima, accused, as Slick laid his rifle carefully along the ledge, sighting down the long barrel. "It is not excitement," Slick reproved, his eye on the sight. "It is business. You are too doggone bloodthirsty, Yakima. We do not want this pilgrim's scalp, unless he plumb insists on it. Sanders has been squeamish about killings lately. Says things are getting too hot." His sights were set for 500 yards. The stranger was less than half that distance away. Slick held his breath, aimed directly at the battered crown of the sombrero below, and squeezed the trigger. The crashing report echoed in the gorge, a flat crack of sound that shuttled back from the distant peaks. Slick glared through the thinning curl of blue smoke. "Son of a gun," he said, a note of disbelief in his voice. That slug did not miss him by 8 inches, and he never batted an eyelash. Did not even look up. "Probably figured it was a horsefly," Yakima said with a dry chuckle. "He is thinking, they are bad in these parts, but what of it? It will soon be sundown. Yes, he is a cool one, that Jasper." "Kick up some dust in front of him," Slick growled, irritated. "See if he will laugh that off." Both rifles belched fire into the depths. Puffs of dust leapt up in the narrow trail, so close they were almost beneath the horse's nose. The spirited animal reared, snorting and plunging. The rider calmed him with a muttered word and a steady tightening of the reins, then proceeded as before, his pace unbroken. "He is one of them dummies," Yakima breathed, his voice full of awe. "Blind, also. Or maybe he is just plain loco. Drill him, Slick." "Shoot his horse, then," he suggested, as Slick shook his head, a deep scowl on his face. "Leave him afoot, and he will take the hint, loco or not." No, Slick said. He eased back from the edge and motioned for his partner to follow. We will head him off up yonder at the bend. There is something about this Jasper that will bear looking into. He has got some joker up his sleeve. The question is, what? They retrieved their horses from a thicket of scrub pine and descended a game trail into the upper canyon. Behind a huge shoulder of basalt that bulged above the trail, Slick loosened the Colt in his holster and motioned Yakima to stay back. The sound of the stranger's approach was close now, the steady rhythm of hooves on rock. I will ride out casual-like, Slick whispered. If shooting starts, you hold him here until Sanders comes. If he wants to parley, you come out with your hand filled and we will take him. All set. All set, Yakima confirmed, his own gun already in his hand. The stranger was slumped in the saddle, his chin sunk on his chest as if he were lost in thought. He looked up when Slick's horse rounded the corner, his movements unhurried. He pushed back his sombrero with a careless gesture, revealing boyish, lean-jawed features that were oddly bleak. His mouth, though it looked like it was formed for laughing, was a straight, grim line. He was slender but wiry, built of rawhide and bone. Upon him, and his horse and his dusty equipment, was the nameless, seasoned air of a man who has eaten much dust in his time and has ridden into more sundowns than he could count. Slick, reins held loosely in his left hand, the thumb of his right hooked in his gun belt, was obviously blocking the trail. The stranger gave him stare for stare, his blue eyes twinkling with a frosty light. His teeth flashed in a sudden smile that held no mirth at all. Make up your mind, cowboy, he advised, his voice calm. Are you coming or going? Obeying an unspoken command, Slick's horse swung a little farther around, moving into the proper angle for a gunfight. Stranger, Slick said, his voice hard, this is called Suicide Trail. It is closed to travel. I sent a slug whistling past your ears. I kicked up dust in front of you. Those are hints in any man's language. Still you push in, regardless. What is the idea? Bluntly put, the other approved with a nod. I will call you cowboy. I am looking for Sanders. Slick's gaze narrowed. You have spoken a name, fellow, like a man having authority. You claim to be a friend of Sanders's? Sanders's? The other said carelessly, as if the name meant little. No. Never had the pleasure of meeting him. What do you want with him? The other man did not immediately reply. He continued to regard Slick with that fixed, humorless smile, the laughter wrinkles around his bitter eyes fading into flat lines. From beyond the bend, at Slick's back, came the swelling thunder of many hoofbeats. Your interest in world affairs, the young fellow said, is plumb wearisome. Do I have to tell my bedtime story to every curious gorilla I meet on this blasted trail? I will talk to Sanders. His hands, which Slick had been watching with hawk-like intentness, had been resting easily on the saddle horn. He now raised them toward his breast pocket and drew forth the makings for a cigarette. In that same instant, Slick's weapon flashed from its holster. Hold it, he said. Hold that pose, hombre. Yakima, he raised his voice. Yakima spurred up behind him, gun in hand, his face a mask of concentration. Take this pilgrim's artillery. Now wait, the youth counseled. He kept his hands raised as ordered, a bag of tobacco in one, a paper in the other, and continued to roll his smoke, eyeing them quizzically. Just a second, while I ponder this. Wait for nothing, growled Yakima. What do you think this is, fella, a parlor game? Do not wiggle an eyebrow. Just the same, the youth said softly, his voice dangerously low, you wait. You just hold your horses while I figure out why I do not get action right here and now. His coolness, his almost quizzical composure while facing the muzzles of 245s, gave even the downright Yakima pause. But he did not hesitate for long. Okay, the stranger said with a slight shrug as if making a concession. I figured to pass out with my irons in my hand, but what is the odds? Come and get them." Yakima reined up beside him, watchful and poised, and breathed a little easier when the youth's holster and rifle scabbard were empty. Slick spurred his horse past their prisoner, blocking the trail that led to the valley. "Now then," Slick began, but he broke off as a file of armed men rode around the bend. Something like a sigh of relief escaped him. "Here's the chief." There were 6 or 7 men in the bristling column. At its head rode a short, long-armed man with a seamed face and a ragged mustache that curved down to meet a lean, outthrust jaw. His eyes, as he drew nearer, were a pale, flat blue, unwinking and cold as crumbs of glass. "What is this, Slick?" His voice was dry and brittle, like sticks snapping. "What have we got here?" The briefness of Slick's reply, and the way the other men sat their horses, waiting on their leader's every move, suggested a rigid military discipline. "A pilgrim," Slick said. "Says he is looking for Sanders." The little man turned his unwinking gaze upon the slender figure, as though he meant to search out his innermost thoughts. "I am Sanders," he said, and it was plain from the stir this admission caused among the hard-bitten ranks that a verdict of some kind had just been pronounced upon the stranger. "Who are you?" "A lone wolf," the young man said, his voice even. "Looking for a roost." Sanders pierced him with another glance, then reined his horse away without another word. At his gesture, each horseman pivoted, heading back toward the bend. "A wolf, eh?" Sanders said over his shoulder, the words carrying in the still air. "Horse him up to the bullpen, boys. We will examine his teeth." Chapter 2. There were 10 horsemen, including the prisoner, who rounded the bend in a cloud of dust and jingling harness. Beyond, a larger group waited, their figures shimmering in the heat. 11 or 12 more, perhaps more than that. It was hard to count noses as they milled and jostled like nervous cattle, swinging their mounts around at Sanders's sharp gesture. This whole grim cavalcade strung out in single file, a serpent of men and horses mounting the trail into the higher, desolate barrens. If the stranger was surprised at these numbers, his bearing gave no hint of it. He sat his saddle in a posture of profound indifference, a hand-rolled cigarette hanging from his careless lips, its smoke a thin plume in the still air. The trail widened here, enough for 2 to ride abreast. Sanders moved his horse up beside him. Slick and Yakima, their duty as lookouts done, brought up the rear, their faces grim. Heading the column was a slender youth wearing a pearl-gray sombrero, the brim pulled low. This one did not look back, nor did the others. No sound broke the oppressive stillness but the creaking of tired leather and the harsh, metallic clanging of steel-shod hooves on stone. Beyond the hogback that marked the end of the narrowing canyon, a small amphitheater bounded by unscalable cliffs opened up beside the trail. It was a natural pocket in the rock, perhaps 30 yards across, a hole in the wall of the world. Into it the column turned, following the slender file leader. All except that youth, who withdrew into the background and remained in the saddle, chin cupped in his hand, a silent observer. The rest dismounted, leaving their horses in an irregular semicircle with reins trailing in the dust. The prisoner dismounted with the others and took a slow look around him. This, it was plain, was no permanent camp, but a temporary rendezvous, a place to lie low. The ghosts of old fires littered the sandy floor in blackened patches. Ancient sign in the dirt told of cattle and horses having been quartered here often. It was a remote spot, sheltered from wind and storm and easily guarded. As a lesser semicircle within the line of horses, Sanders's followers grouped themselves, standing shoulder to shoulder, their faces hard and unreadable. It was revealed now that there were 23 of them in all, including the silent figure on horseback in the background. That one's features, hidden beneath the shadow of his sombrero, appeared to be smooth-cheeked, almost effeminate. Spiritually, as in the flesh, he held himself aloof from the pack, Of the others, some were young and full of a mean swagger, like Slick and Yakima. Some, like Sanders, were seamed of feature and grizzled of hair, their eyes holding the dead light of men who had seen too much. A few were neat in appearance, standing erect with a swaggering semblance of pride. But mostly they were unshaved, slovenly men with yellow-fanged grins and clothes that smelled of sweat and trail dust. Upon all of them, men of differing types and calibers, was the unmistakable stamp of the reckless and the lawless. Sanders motioned the prisoner forward. In the heavy silence that had fallen upon the cleft, his voice was like the rasping of dried leaves skittering across rock. "Fellow," he said, "you may have faced courts before. Most of us have. There will be no lawyers here, no tomfoolery. There is no bail, nor any hope of appeal. Are you ready for some straight talk?" "Shoot," the young man said, his voice flat. "You have seen me," Sanders said, his cold eyes boring into the man. "You have seen these fellows. You could pick any one of us out of a lineup, which means you have crossed a threshold, and you cannot turn back. You savvy that, eh?" "Sure," the young fellow said. He added almost as an afterthought, "I have crossed worse thresholds." "Understand also that I am a judge of men," Sanders continued in his dry, unemotional way. "I read brands. I have not figured you out yet. I will when we begin to talk. On what you say, and how you say it, rests the one chance in 10 you have got of leaving this hole alive. And if you leave," he jerked a thumb toward the jagged pinnacles that clawed at the sky, "you go west, not east. Get me?" "Got you," the fellow nodded, his expression unchanged. "Slick." The raw-boned youth stepped forward. "Let us hear your end of it." "He came up the canyon, riding easy," said Slick. "I sent a slug past his ear. He never batted an eye. Both of us fired in front of him. No result. I figured maybe he was a friend of yours. So me and Yakima—" "Wait," Sanders cut in. "He made no sign." "No sign," Slick confirmed. "Rode like a wooden Indian. We met him at the bend. He claimed he wanted to talk to you. Named your name. So we took his guns. Then you came. Is that all?" "Only this," said Slick. "For a minute, it looked like we would have to down him to get his guns. Then he changed his mind. Said something or other about aiming to cash in shooting, but what of it? That is all." Sanders waved him back and stepped closer to the youth. "All right, fellow. Let us have it. What is your name?" "Campbell. Rip Campbell." "Where are you from?" "The valley." "You are riding a Bar X horse," Sanders said, indicating the black gelding. "Your hands are the hands of a fellow who works. Are you on the Bar X payroll?" "No," said Rip. "I worked my own spread. I got a quarter section across the valley. On Wolf Creek. That is," he amended, his voice hardening, "I had it until this morning. Now the bank has got it." "Ever get into any trouble?" "Plenty." "No wisecracks," Sanders said. Irritation did not show in his voice, but in some nameless manner its very dryness breathed of menace. "I mean trouble with the law." "No," said Rip. "Why then," said Sanders, "did you come riding with a full outfit? Why did you push on when rifle slugs told you to stop? Why did you ask for me?" "I will tell you why," said Rip. He cast down his cigarette and ground it into the sand beneath his heel. It was the first time he had shown any real emotion. He spoke through lips that parted grudgingly. "Because I am a failure down in the valley. At honest work. Because my own kind threw me out. They are not my kind. I did not fit in. I will never fit in. I am branded. My father was a gunman and a killer. Water seeks its own level. That is what folks say. I could go on beating my head against a stone wall. Or I could quit and head for the barrens. I did so today. Turned my back on the valley and life and rode to Suicide Trail. So folks would know they were right. And laugh. He was breathing heavily now, his chest rising and falling. Is that enough? No, said Sanders. His hard eyes did not waver in their unwinking scrutiny. You have got to have the whole story, eh? Rip had regained his composure, and a humorless grin touched his lips. Okay, I will tell it once, and no more. If you have got tears to shed, shed them now. I had a little homestead over yonder. A shack, a spring, and a jag of beef. There was good foundation stock in that beef. The spring was A1. The shack was a good shack. Home, you savvy. Climbing roses around the door. Never mind the trimmings, Sanders cut in, his voice like sandpaper. It was a good spread. What happened to it? I lost it, said Rip flatly. I needed money. It was when I went out borrowing that I found out where I stood in that man's country. I thought folks had forgotten the strain that was in me, the wild strain. I had worked hard all my life, you savvy. Shot square. But they had not forgotten. I was not a good risk. I would break out sometime, like a rash. Sure, they had alibis for not backing my play. Hard times. The falling beef market. The baby had measles. All that plain and fancy horseradish. But underneath it all was the old hand of steel. So I went to the banker. He was happy to oblige. Not as a banker. Oh my, no. I was not a good risk. But as an individual, he would call my bluff. At 10%. Plus a confidential bonus. Plus a chattel mortgage, listing everything but my eye teeth. And you lost the works. Sanders nodded slowly. The banker wiped you out. Then what? Then, said Rip, I went into a huddle with myself. Cold turkey. I had worked hard ever since I had gotten my growth. I had lost my stake in a single play. I had shot square with the world all the while, hoping in my bleary-eyed fashion that I was gaining credit for it. That was a delusion, also. I could do it all again. Eat dust and sweat, make another stake, run a bluff as a stalwart citizen, and get nowhere. How do you buck a combination like that? What is it all about, who says so, and why? The answers to those questions are why I am here. There is nothing mysterious about it, nothing out of the way. Rip Campbell, who had been grazing under false pretenses in those peaceful pastures, has done turned back to the wild bunch. Sanders eyed him unwinkingly for a long space. It was plain to those who watched, who knew Sanders, that the acid test was being applied to the newcomer's story. You say your father was a gunman and a killer. Did he, to your knowledge, ever circulate up in the horse heaven country? Under the name of long chance carousers? My father, said the youth, his voice sharp, is out of the picture. Let his bones rest. The name is Campbell. The abrupt reply did not seem to antagonize Sanders. When you came up the trail, why did you ask for me by name? Who told you I was here? It has been rumored in the valley for months, said Rip. In all the talk about impeaching the sheriff for letting this den of reptiles flourish up in the pinnacles, it has been whispered that Sanders himself was on the job. The fire-spitting desperado in person. Said Sanders, and you had a friendly feeling for this bold, bad outlaw. You admire him and aim to throw in with him, is that it? Rip grinned a bitter grin. No, he said. I would not kid you, Sanders. I do not crave to throw in with you. I do not admire the color of your eyes, nor the trails you have blazed. But if I am forced into the wild bunch where I belong, I will do it right. It is not the prospect of associating with you and your uncurried wolves that fetched me here. It is this: an army is gathering in the valley, a vigilante committee of short-tempered and long-suffering citizens who will wipe out this rattlesnake's reunion in a hurry. Dust will mill plenty. When it is settled, there will not be anything left up here in the pinnacles but a flock of new graves. That is the action I crave, and the trail I took. Bah! Sanders spat on the ground. He shot a quick, angry glance at his cohorts, who had stirred uneasily at this blunt picture of the retribution gathering in the plains. We could stand off an army in a showdown. We could thumb our noses in their faces and sit tight. We will name our own deal and see it through. When the time comes, and not before, we will cash our chips and get out of the game. Let them prowl over cold trails. We will be gone plenty far with heavy winnings. He broke off abruptly, his voice tight with an anger directed not so much at Rip, but at the thought he had put into words. And as for you, Campbell, we will pass on you pronto. Joe. He gestured to the mounted youth in the background. You have been listening to this pilgrim. He is hard. He does not give a damn whether school keeps or not. The question is, will he be useful? Let us have your hunch. The horseman had been pushing forward during this speech. Rip saw now to his astonishment that this was no boy as he had supposed, but a woman. A girl rather, cool and poised, as unemotional, so it seemed, as Sanders himself. She did not dismount. She pulled up her horse beside Sanders and resumed her former pose, chin cupped in her hand. She looked down at Rip through long-lashed hazel eyes, whose air of detachment was sexless and uncompromising. Meeting her searching scrutiny, Rip was also aware of Sanders's reptilian gaze, studying them both with a jealous and hawk-like intentness. Chapter 3. Her interrogation was brief, but every word was a sharp, pointed tool. It speedily became evident that her mental processes were more keen and snappy than those of Sanders himself. "Cowboy," said she, her voice even and cool, "you are attempting to crash into a closed corporation. You are uninvited. The burden of proof is on you. We can use men who know guns, horses, and hard trails. But on the trails we ride, we have got to know each other better than most brothers are known to each other. You understand that, eh?" "If that is an apology," said Rip, "let it pass." "It is no apology," said the girl shortly. "We have got to know where you stand. You might be a peace officer, you know." "I might at that," Rip agreed easily. "And if you are not a peace officer, your motives for leaving the valley as you have announced them do not pass muster with me. For instance," her long-lashed gaze swept him from head to foot, "you are young. You are healthy and strong. You are of the dominant type, reckless, fiery, and spirited." "Yes," she nodded, appraising Ly, "and handsome." "Thank you," said Rip, the corner of his mouth twitching. "I could judge the good points of a horse," she retorted, her lips curling, "with equal skill. And, as impersonally. The point I was approaching is this. The loss of your homestead was a financial setback. The distrust of your neighbors, in spite of your square shooting and hard work, was a blow to your pride. But these are picayune matters, after all, to one who is young and vigorous, and before whom the world is outspread like a smiling range. Somewhere else there is plenty of room. New prospects. New friends and neighbors who know nothing of your past or your father's sins. Is it not strange, then, unbelievable, in fact, that you should put all your chances for life and the pursuit of happiness behind you and ride up suicide trail?" "No more strange," Rip retorted, his own smile gone now, his posture more guarded, like a skilled poker player facing an adversary of real caliber. "Unbelievable or not, lady, you are arguing with facts. I have put the past behind me. I am here. And that is final." "True," she agreed. "But why? Let us probe a little deeper. There is only one force that could send a man of your type deliberately into the wild bunch. It is not the opinion of neighbors. It is not the loss of a homestead. It is something more damaging to the egotism and self-esteem that men call pride. Tell me, she did not appear to smile, but her firm cheeks dimpled just a little. Was she beautiful? You loved her, and she did you dirt, is that it? A dark flush rose from his collar to the roots of his tawny hair. His jaw set like a trap. This business, said he, his voice low and tight, has gone far enough. My personal and private affairs will add no chips to this game. I have told my story. You can take it or leave it. So, she was beautiful then. And life, of course, was not worth living anymore, she said, nodding as if confirming a fact. It would be a grand gesture to ride up into the Badlands like a lone wolf. You would probably be shot at the gap, but what of it? Perhaps when they brought in your bullet-riddled body, folks would shake their heads and feel sorry they had talked about you like that. She might even shed a tear or two, because she had driven you to it, and you so young. Cowboy. Rip eyed her venomously, with the flushed and badgered air of a small boy facing a tormentor he was powerless to reach. All of which, she continued, her voice cutting through his anger, is fine as far as it goes. Some of these men have less excuse than that for being here. Some have no excuse at all. Still, they are fair to medium outlaws mostly, and all of them will hang someday, as all good outlaws should. Easy on that girl, Sanders warned, a flicker of annoyance in his cold eyes. This pilgrim does not know you are joking. And this is no time for wisecracks. The point is, she continued, her gaze fixed on Rip, you have blazed no trails. Thus far, you have been bad only in your imagination. You are neither fish, flesh, nor fowl. What guarantee have we that you will stay put? You have not any, said Rip shortly. I am offering none. If my being here does not speak for itself, then I am through. What I crave action on is this. How long are you going to keep up this tomfoolery? The girl looked at him steadily for a space, while the shadowed cleft grew so still you could hear a man's heartbeat. Sanders appeared to be awaiting her verdict. Then she straightened in the saddle, her decision made. The tomfoolery, she said, and her voice was as cold as a winter creek, is over. You are not a peace officer. No peace officer rides into certain death and gives up his guns without a struggle. You are not a spy. The usefulness of a spy depends upon his returning with useful information, alive. Your story, as much as you have admitted, rings true. You have turned your back on the valley. You have got this far up Suicide Trail. But this, her voice dropped, hard as iron, is as far as you will get. Your trail ends here. She turned away from him then, dismissing him as if he were already a ghost. To Sanders she said briefly, the works. She leaned down to whisper something in the outlaw's ear. Something like a collective sigh escaped the intent ranks. There was a shuffling of feet and a nervous creaking of harness as the men shifted their weight. More than one hand fumbled furtively for the makings as Sanders took Rip's rifle from Yakima and motioned him forward. You will stand over yonder, Campbell. He jerked a thumb toward the sheer rock of the opposite wall. What is this? Said Rip, his voice once again cool and composed. Curtains. Curtains, said Sanders. You are not wanted here. But having come this far, you cannot go back to the valley alive. Wipe that grin off your face, Campbell. If you have ever met up with a solemn occasion in your life, this is it. Nevertheless, said Rip, taking up his stand with his back to the wall, grinning is my privilege, and I am clinging to it regardless of what is going to happen. Take off your hat, Sanders commanded, his voice brittle. The light is none too good. Rip removed his hat and cast it aside. The sharp, metallic click of Sanders's rifle as he slid a cartridge home echoed in the cleft like a closing vault door. "Doggone," said Rip plaintively. "This is a penny-ante way to pass out. I wish I had kept my guns." "Any last word?" questioned Sanders, the rifle already coming up. "Take care of my horse," said Rip. "He is ace high. Watch the frog on the off forefoot. It is too soft. Subject to stone bruise." Sanders nodded once, a curt jerk of his head. "Nothing else." "Nothing else." "Now wait a second, Chief." A youth with a face glistening with sweat stepped forth from the ranks of spectators. "This is not right. I am not squeamish about mowing a gent down in a free-for-all. But somehow or another, in cold blood this way." Sanders, his rifle half raised to his shoulder, did not speak. He merely turned to look the mutinous one full in the face. The man's protest died in his throat. He held his ground for a long moment under that dead-eyed stare, then retreated, cursing under his breath, and pulled his sombrero lower over his eyes. Methodically, Sanders turned back to the business at hand. He took deliberate aim, squinting down the sights. It was gloomy in the cleft, but not too dark for this kind of close shooting. Rip stood erect, his gaze fixed upon a lone star that twinkled high above the iron peaks, a single point of light in the deepening twilight. The rifle roared. The sound was a physical blow, slamming against the rock walls and shuttling back from the distant crags. From the weak-kneed youth who had raised his voice in protest came a profane cry of surprise. The prisoner had not fallen. He still stood. He raised his hand slowly, as if in a dream, and touched his cheek. His exploring fingertips came away red, but the superficial scratch had not been caused by the bullet. Flattening against the wall just beside his head, the slug had showered him with sharp splinters of rock. "You are not running a bluff, then," said Sanders dryly, lowering the rifle. "No gent with a joker up his sleeve could play it to the finish like that. Campbell, you are elected." "Show," said Rip, his voice a little shaken but his grin returning. Now there was a grandstand play. "Grin, cowboy," said the girl from her horse, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "And as for you, Tonto," Sanders turned himself about waspishly, "how long is it going to take you fuzz-faced yearlings to learn to back my play blind? Where is that chicken-livered young rooster who spoke out of turn?" But the culprit, head hanging and face crimson with shame, slunk still farther into the background, swallowed by the shadows of the other men. "Let us go," said Sanders. His sharp gesture closed the incident. "You, Bull and Pike, take the post at the gap. Turn all strays back without exception. Slick and Yakima did okay to let this pilgrim in, but the trail is closed now. This army has gained its last recruit. All right, men. To the camp." Chapter 4. Belated light still clung to the highest, razor-sharp peaks, but the gorges below were already choked with deep shadow. The air grew thin and cold. Many matches flared to life behind cupped, calloused hands as the long column of riders pushed westward into the barrens. Red sparks trailed from reckless lips, and from the striking of steel-shod hooves against stone, brief constellations in the gathering dark. The girl, Jo, was a distant silhouette far ahead on the undulating line. Strange, hard faces were ahead of Rip and to his rear. The last rider, a silent shepherd for his flock of wolves, was Sanders. Though he was tightening his hold on life moment by moment, Rip rode through a kind of unreality. Having girded his spirit to face the final grim event, it was hard to simply lay that armor aside. Yet, riding as one awakening from a bad dream, he was keenly conscious of his surroundings. They were unreal, fantastic, a world of savage, brutal dimensions. Mighty gorges forked to the right and left, black wounds in the earth. Jagged rims were outlined against the first, strengthening stars. The trail, as a trail, forked and thinned and was lost in the rock-strewn landscape, but always the troop bore steadily toward the memory of the setting sun. "Pull up, Campbell," came Sanders's dry voice at his elbow. The outlaw leader had drawn abreast unnoticed, under cover of the noise of their passage through a rocky defile. The riders behind them passed by, not sparing them a glance. The head of the column, having crossed the crumbled moraine upon which the pair now stood, was bearing directly upon a sheer, rugged wall of rock that seemed to have no break. Yet as Rip watched, the riders were swallowed up one by one. He saw then that a vertical, shadow-choked crevasse, which appeared to be nothing more than a shallow crack, was in reality wide enough for the passage of a mounted man, leading deep into the heart of the mighty wall. "When you enter there," said Sanders, his voice flat, "there is no returning. Do you understand me, Campbell?" "Got you," said Rip. "And before you enter," the outlaw continued, "there are a detail or two to be understood. You will see action in plenty on this trail. Make no mistake about that. But we proceed according to a well-planned campaign. I give the orders. You follow them to the letter. You ride where I say to ride, and when. You do what I say to do, and how. Got that?" Rip nodded, his eyes on the black maw of the crevasse. "The split," said Sanders, "is 1/3 to me and the balance share and share alike. Until after a forthcoming deal, which you will hear referred to as the big job, I hold all the loot. I am the keeper of the keys, the banker, the custodian of the jackpot. It avoids argument. It holds the group together. Any objection?" "No objection," said Rip. "There is one more detail," said Sanders, his voice dropping slightly. "It concerns Joe. 3 men have been buried since she joined us. They were all young. They were all careless of the hereafter. I found it necessary to eliminate them because—" "Not interested," Rip interrupted, his tone final. "Nevertheless," said Sanders, ignoring the interruption, "flesh is frail. You may wake up some bright morning with a changed outlook. If so, you will recall what I have told you. And I am telling you," said Rip with a bitter smile, "that you do not have to post any notice at the crossroads for me. There is a number of things I am not interested in. At the very end of that list is women." The noisy progress of the last of the column had died away inside the crevasse. Sanders sat his horse for a space as if lost in thought, but Rip could feel the man's emotionless gaze upon him, probing. All about them, as their horses stood like statues, was the vast and imposing silence of the peaks. "Campbell," said Sanders abruptly, "we are alone now. You left a girl down yonder." "Yes," said Rip. "You hanker to go back to her?" "No." "You rode up the trail, hoping you would be dropped at the gap?" "Not exactly," said Rip. "I took a chance that they would not drop me cold. That I could shoot it out. If I lost, what of it?" "And you figured you still had a chance when your back was to the wall?" "No," said Rip. "When you said curtains, I thought you meant it. It was a good bluff, Sanders." The reply seemed to please the outlaw. Some of his rigid aloofness thawed. "As a matter of fact," he said dryly, "it was a mighty thin margin that made it a bluff, Rip. But Joe put a thought in my head. You will be useful on the big job." It was the second time the mysterious campaign had been suggested. Rip expected him to enlarge upon it, but instead, Sanders turned abruptly to another subject. "Rip, did your father ever mention an old pal named Shorty Dever? Or another old pal named King Colton?" Rip stiffened a little in the saddle. "We are alone," Sanders reminded him. "He did not discuss the past with me much," said Rip carefully. "I have heard those names." "I knew you as soon as I looked into your face," said Sanders. "You have long chance's eyes." And his smile. The same cold nerve in a showdown. "Who are you then?" Rip demanded. "I am Sanders," said the other dryly. "I was Shorty Dever. The records say he was dead and buried up in the Coeur d'Alene. Let his record rest with him." Sanders has blazed his own trails. The hackles rose on Rip's neck. It was like facing a man risen from the grave. He had assumed since childhood, as had the world for more than a decade, that with his father's death, the last of the notorious trio had passed on into the limbo of frontier legend. The legend itself was lurid and undying. Carruthers, Colton, and Dever, so the old-timers affirmed, had comprised a pat hand in any game and in many a showdown. Long Chance Carruthers, the cold-eyed, smiling gunman with a notoriously big heart. King Colton, who carried himself like a cavalier of less swashbuckling days. Genteel, polished, and aloof, even when dealing from the bottom of a deck or reaching for a 10-inch bowie. And Shorty Dever, the most dangerous of the trio, the least condoned, a man as cold, calculating, and fearless as a copperhead snake. Long Chance was gone. King Colton, too, in his debonair fashion, had strode on into the shadows. Only Shorty, the reptilian, still lived. "Why tell me this?" demanded Rip, his voice tight. "Why?" echoed the other, softly. "I will tell you why. I am not superstitious, Rip. I do not believe in signs, omens, fate, or the hereafter. But there is a design here. Because look, Joe's name is Josephine Colton." "King Colton's daughter?" "The same," said Sanders. "His pride. His pearl. His treasure. Which, as I suggested before, is now under my protection." Rip permitted himself a cynical grin, but said nothing. "Joe has already proved her caliber," continued Sanders. "She and I work hand in glove now. If you measure up like Long Chance, the three of us can make big medicine. We have got a good gang, as far as gunfighting and hard riding goes. Outside of that, they are cattle. They will be useful up to the big job. No further. Think it over." He eyed Rip fixedly, significantly, then turned his horse away. "I will go first. I will give your horse confidence. It is a rough trail in the dark." He mounted forthwith into the crevasse. Rip followed at his heels. At the edge of the engulfing blackness, he twisted in the saddle to look back. For both concealment and defense, the inner stronghold of the outlaw band, of which this was obviously the entrance, was well-nigh perfect. At 50 paces across the moraine, the crevasse would seem impassable to mounted men. The broken fragments of the moraine itself, shifting underfoot, left no trail. If the right crevasse, which was but one of a dozen cleaving the mighty wall, were discovered, a lone guard with plenty of ammunition could stand off an army. Looking up, he glimpsed a motionless figure in silhouette against the stars. He was facing eastward toward the down-sloping barrens, like an eagle looking forth from his eyrie. His sombrero shifted briefly as he peered down at the riders in the depths. His cigarette glowed like a single angry eye. Otherwise, he might have been carved from the shoulder of rock against which he leaned. Rip had assumed, in so far as he had attempted to visualize the outlaws' retreat, that it would be a mere segment of bleak canyon, similar to the pocket where he had faced Sanders's rifle. Instead, to his surprise, a considerable valley opened up beyond the cleft. It was a hole in the wall, but on a much larger scale than he had expected, a green and sheltered oasis hidden in the vastness of the barrens. There was a sizable flat, dark with scattered clumps of pine, watered by a meandering creek that glittered with reflected starlight. Directly across from the point where he stood was another break in the towering ramparts that hemmed in the huge pocket. It was a narrow gorge, cut through the ancient crater rim by centuries of erosion. From it came the distant murmur of a hidden waterfall. An air of tranquility lay upon the scene, as upon a snug mountain homestead at twilight. Horses were grazing in the open. A calf bawled, and a cow muttered in reply. The grunting of hogs came from a hidden pen. Rude corrals were visible through the gloom. Flanking these corrals, at the foot of the wall, were several log cabins in an irregular row. From these rude dwellings emanated sounds significant of a social order flourishing doggedly beyond the pale. A noisy brawl was in progress in one cabin. In another, a guitar twanged mournfully. There was a murmur of voices, deep-toned, interspersed with harsh laughter. Also, from cabins far down the line, came unmistakable feminine tones, raised above the clatter of pots and pans, and the wailing of fretful children. "Women folks?" questioned Rip incredulously. "Why not?" said Sanders. 3 or 4 of the fellows were family men. When they turned bad, their women stayed by them. I found them here when I moved in and took command. I let them stay. The children are a nuisance. The women snivel. But in the main, it is good business. Even the young bucks like to see a touch of domestic life. It makes them think we have set up something permanent. The women, such as they are company for Joe. They turned their horses loose to graze. Rip unrolled his blankets in an empty bunk in a large cabin that comprised the bachelor headquarters of the crew. His rifle and sidearms had been returned to him. He hung these on adjacent pegs, disposed his equipment to his liking, stretched himself out and rolled a cigarette. It was like military barracks. Cigarette smoke hung thick and blue from the blackened rafters overhead. Men lolled in their bunks, yawning. Stud and draw poker battles waged at tables in the center of the big room. Cribbage addicts muttered over their pegs, heads together. From the conversation around him, Rip learned much of the camp routine. It, too, was military in character, following set rules. The unmarried men ate at the cook shack, next in line to the north. The kitchen was presided over by Grattan's widow. Grattan himself, it appeared, having cashed in his chips at some past imbroglio known as the Two Forks job. The girl Jo was quartered with the widow. They occupied a choice cabin overlooking the flats. It had a small garden with flowers in it. Sanders occupied the cabin at the end of the line to the south. Sanders ruled, Rip gathered, with an iron hand. Complaints were loud among the rank and file, according to the way of active and reckless men. These concerned the food, the night guard, the way certain jobs had been handled, the mystery that surrounded the forthcoming big job. But through it all, it was plain that Sanders's dominance was unquestioned, that each man of the crew was prepared to follow him blindly. Guarded references to the girl Jo were significant of this dominance. There were those among the reckless ranks who would have laughed at any odds, faced death without a quiver, and for stakes less than a smile from a pretty woman. Even in the eyes of these men, it was plain, the girl was unattainable, unapproachable, beyond their horizon. She was, so their manner indicated, Sanders's property, his undivided spoils. Rip slept soundly that night. When the lights went out, and the camp grew still, physical and spiritual exhaustion claimed him. He had no time to speculate through the quiet hours on the events and crossroads just past, or to appraise the future. He tried to ask himself certain questions, but the answers eluded him. The past and future were vague, remote things. He rode between them, in a gathering darkness that finally pulled him down into an undreaming void. Chapter 5. Horsemen came and went in the small hours, their movements stirring dust that never seemed to settle. Yawning guards, their faces pale in the moonlight, stumbled in from their posts, and grumbling reliefs departed into the darkness. A lone rooster crowed, its call thin and sharp in the cold air. From across the flats came a strengthening chorus of songbirds, greeting a dawn that had not yet arrived. It was still early in the morning, but broad daylight was bleeding over the eastern peaks when a hand shook Rip's shoulder. He looked up into the impassive face of Clanton, a slender, silent youth who moved like a shadow. Clanton spoke tersely, his voice barely a whisper. "The chief wants you. Dress for the trail. Bring your guns. Leave your rifle." When Rip stepped down from the bunkhouse threshold into the crisp morning air, Sanders was waiting. The towering figure of Slick loomed at his side like a rough-hewn monument. 4 saddled horses stood nearby, reins trailing in the dust, their breath pluming in the chill. Sanders uttered no word of greeting. His pale blue eyes inspected Rip's face briefly, impersonally, then flicked down to his gun belt and spurs, taking his measure. "Campbell," said he, "you are a new recruit. I have got a job for you." "Shoot," said Rip. "You will breakfast at the cook shack," Sanders directed. "It is ready for you. Eat hearty, because it is a long haul. You will not be back until after sundown. You will ride with Slick. 2 more will meet you at an appointed place. Slick will give you the layout later on. 3 old hands will be with you, you understand. Slick is in charge." "Got it." "Got it," said Rip. "Let us go, Slick." Rip noted for the first time, as Sanders turned and walked away, that the outlaw leader moved with a slight, almost imperceptible limp. At the cook shack, Slick ate with a prodigious appetite, shoveling food into his mouth with grim purpose. Rip ate more sparingly. For him, it was a mechanical process, a chore induced only by Sanders's warning that a long haul lay ahead. Save for the widow Grattan, who ministered to their wants in a heavy silence, the 2 were alone in the long, rough-timbered mess room. "Where are we heading?" Rip questioned, midway through the meal. "I will tell you later," Slick replied without looking up from his plate. The widow was a large, blonde woman, with the faded vestiges of a former comeliness. Her plump, somewhat stolid features were deeply scored with lines of hardship, and her eyes were heavy with a grief that seemed to have settled into her bones. She evinced no curiosity concerning Rip, who was a stranger. They came, they went, so her weary bearing proclaimed, and what of it? But once, through the open door that led into the kitchen, he found her covertly studying him. He thought he caught a hint of pity in her gaze, a species of vague, helpless compassion, as if she were looking at another man already dead. At the rear of the kitchen was a single window. Through this, dallying over his coffee, Rip could see a small cabin higher on the slope. Only a segment of it was visible, a patch of bright flowers at the threshold, and the doorway itself. In this doorway the girl Jo stood in a pensive pose, her cheek resting against the frame, looking out across the flats. Her head was bare, her dark, luxuriant hair massed in shapely confusion. Upon her, as upon the cabin, was some of the reflected glory of the strengthening dawn. Slick saw her too. He eyed her fixedly as he ate, peering up from under his shaggy brows, his chewing slowing for a moment. "A picture, eh?" said Rip. He attempted a jocularity he did not feel. Who dealt Sanders a hand like that? Beneath the table, Slick's knee pressed warningly against his. Rip recalled then that the cabin was the widow Grattan's, and that the widow, from the kitchen, was doubtless listening to every word that was being said. They rode up to the cleft, Slick in the lead. As they threaded that rough-hewn corridor, Rip saw that considerable work had been done to make it passable to mounted men. Huge fragments of rock had been moved aside, barriers blasted away. Handholds had been cut into the vertical face of the crevasse, leading up to the lookout's perch. "Good hunting," remarked the sentry on duty, chuckling and grinning down upon them. "Do not take any brass nickels. See you later, maybe." "Do not forget your knitting," retorted Slick. "Save some of your strength to fight off horseflies. Keep the eggs warm." Rip discovered later that the lookout's post was referred to by the younger members of the crew as the Cuckoo's Nest. Because no armed force had ever stormed the retreat, and action at this point was nil, it was a chore irksome to restless and energetic men. Jovial interchanges were invariable between the sentry and those who rode forth, the reckless banter of men who might not meet again to see another sundown together. The lookouts at the gap were invisible from below, yet Rip knew that their eyes were upon them as they passed through. They rode out from the shadows, and into the full, blinding brilliance of sunrise upon the sleeping valley. At Slick's gesture, they pulled to the left, threading the chaparral and stunted juniper of the sun-drenched slope. They did not descend to the valley floor. They mounted higher, skirting the edge of the barrens, bearing always northward. Slick avoided open spaces as much as possible, selecting with instinctive caution the dry washes and boulder-strewn arroyos that roughly followed their course. At midday, they watered their horses at a mountain spring, from which a rivulet chuckled down into a sheltered cove where the ancient, dilapidated buildings of a homestead nestled. Slick drew forth a roughly drawn map, studied it with a scowl, and squinted at the sun. Rip, his cigarette hanging motionless from his lips, looked out through narrow-lidded, brooding eyes upon the sun-drenched range. "Cowboy," said Slick abruptly, "we are here." He jerked a thumb toward the homestead below. "The job is down yonder." Said Rip. "That Chin-Whisker Ranch looks like a sheep outfit to me. Are we stealing a couple of lambs?" "No," said Slick. "It is heftier than that. But it ought to be just as easy. 3 or 4 of the fellows that are not known, you savvy, are circulating continuous in the valley. They keep their ears to the ground and their noses upwind, and report world affairs to the chief. From what they tell us, down yonder is a citizen named Bodini, an uncombed sheep fancier who plays a lone hand. This Bodini person just last week sold a band of muttons to the packing trust. For those blatting half-wits, he received the sum of 3,000 smackers. Iron men. Simoleons. Coin of the realm. Being as distrustful of the world as a wall-eyed carp in a horse trough, he has got it salted somewhere on the premises. That is the little jackpot we are after." "Fine," said Rip, his lip curling in a sneer. "Great. So that is the brand of action 2 salty gents, loaded to the eyeteeth with artillery, have been heading for since sunup. Calling on an unsuspecting sheepherder. Euchering him out of a stake it has probably taken him years to accumulate. Now there is a trail-blazing enterprise, and no mistake. There will be 4 of us. The boss believes in playing it safe," said Slick, ignoring the sarcasm. 2 more came over the ridge trail and are waiting down below. Get a hold of yourself, Campbell. Come down out of the clouds. It is shekels we are after, not noble, uplifting adventure. A roll like this does not grow on bushes." "Bah," said Rip under his breath. "Let us go." They descended the slope under the cover of a heavy stand of jack pine. Dilapidated outbuildings could be glimpsed through the trees. A windmill creaked a mournful, rhythmic complaint. The thick stench of sheep grew plainer on the still air. A snake-rail fence barred their path. They skirted this, bearing eastward. From a clump of junipers within sight of the rambling barn and the cabin beyond, 2 horsemen emerged and reined up, waiting. One of these was Clanton. The other, to Rip's astonishment, was the girl Jo. Some nameless signal passed between Clanton and Slick, a raised eyebrow, an all but imperceptible nod. What this communication meant, Rip neither knew nor cared. He looked the girl full in the face. She, too, was looking at him, and for a fleeting instant he caught an expression in her long-lashed eyes that amazed and troubled him. It was strained, questioning, almost desperate. Yet when she spoke, her mocking tones gave the lie to what he had just glimpsed. "Well, well, Jesse James," said she. "You are here, eh? Ready for the slaughter?" "And how?" cut in Slick. "Clanton, what is the dope?" "He has been working on the hog pen," said the still-faced Clanton. "He cut back to the shack a minute ago, probably for fodder. Smoke is coming out of the chimney. Nobody else on the premises." "Fine," said Slick. "Made to order. We will ride up in a bunch. Casual, like we were just drifting through. You and Jo up front, Clanton. Me and Rip will follow." "Okay." "Okay," said Clanton. They came to a sagging gate. Clanton leaned from the saddle and swung it open. As its hinges squeaked raucously, two short-tailed shepherd dogs burst forth from the cabin, barking with a furious, high-pitched intensity. On their heels appeared an ancient and exceedingly shaggy person, hairy as the dogs themselves, a rifle held ready in his hands. He eyed the quartet fixedly, his bearded jaw outthrust. Then, seeing the girl, his posture relaxed and the rifle lowered. He turned, leaned the weapon against the doorframe, and stepped down to meet them, hitching up his ragged jeans with a sudden, self-conscious gesture. "Draw when we draw, Rip," Slick commanded from the corner of his mouth, his voice a low growl. "Shoot if we have to down him. Otherwise, stay put and watch how it is done." Chapter 6. The dogs rushed them, a snarling, snapping blur of fur and teeth. The show of belligerence, however, was a flash fire, fading instantly at a curt, guttural word from the sheepman. They turned away as one, and stood in the shade of the porch, tongues lolling, their eyes still watchful. "Howdy," said Clanton, his voice as flat and dry as the dust under his horse's hooves. "Nice day." The ancient one nodded, his head bobbing on a scrawny neck. His round eyes, like shy forest pools surrounded by the thick underbrush of his hair and beard, beamed bashfully upon the girl. "We are from the Lazy Z," Clanton continued, jerking a thumb vaguely toward the north. "Looking up strays in the pinnacles. And brother, was it hot." He mopped his brow for effect. "Got any drinking water?" "Sure," said the other. His first suspicions, allayed by the presence of the girl, gave way to a writhing embarrassment. "Over at the pump." "Wait, I will get you the dipper." "Never mind the dipper," said Clanton, his tone not changing by a single degree. "Reach for the sky, Bodini. Do not move." Half turned toward the water bucket on an adjacent bench, the sheepman halted, transfixed. Horror flooded his face, a slow tide that succeeded astonishment as his eyes looked into the black, unblinking muzzles of two weapons. The girl reined her horse back a little, a silent spectator. Rip sat his own mount, immobile, disdaining to draw his gun. Belatedly, the ancient one grasped the grim, final import of the moment. His glance darted toward his rifle, leaning against the cabin wall. But Slick's horse danced between them, and Slick slid to the ground, a hackamore already in his hand. "Hold it," he said tersely. With an expert, fluid motion, he looped the rope over the old man's upraised wrists, dragged them down, and trussed them securely behind his back. The dogs leapt suddenly from the shadows, snarling a hideous, low menace. Slick kicked at them, cursing. When they returned to the attack, their lips peeled back from their teeth, he leveled his weapon upon them. "Do not shoot," pleaded the ancient one, his voice a reedy whine. "Please, mister. They are the best dogs in the county. Down, Buster. Back, Sandy." The dogs obeyed, but they circled uneasily in the background, hackles erect, their growls a constant threatening rumble. Slick motioned with his gun toward the cabin. "Inside, old-timer," he ordered. "Do not stand there wheezing. Never mind the questions. You will find out pronto what this is all about." The interior of the cabin, in stark contrast to its shaggy owner and the dilapidated homestead surrounding it, was neat, well kept, and spotlessly clean. No ashes littered the hearth. The bunk was made up with military precision, the blanket pulled taut. Dishes shone on oilcloth-covered shelves. Beside the window was a rawhide mesh chair. Slick and Clanton seated their prisoner upon it, then bound his arms to its back and his ankles to its legs until he was as helpless as a hog-tied calf. Then they stood back and faced him. "Bodini," said Slick, "where have you got it hid?" Rip and the girl had entered. They stood side by side near the door, casting long shadows into the room. The ancient one peered at the girl with a species of awe, then more intently at Rip. Finally, he looked up doggedly at his inquisitors. "Got what hid?" he countered. "No stalling, Bodini," said Clanton gently, which was more menacing than any shout. Talk fast. This short-tempered outfit will not stand for nonsense. You sold your sheep last week. You got 3,000 for them. You did not put it in the bank at Lodgepole. You brought it here to the ranch. A roll of big bills. Where's that roll? The Ancient One licked his dry, cracked lips. I paid it out, he said, his voice thin. It is gone. I owed over at the bank. And at the grocery store. There was a mortgage due. You are lying, said Clanton, his voice still soft. Talk to him, Slick. Bodini, said Slick, stepping closer, unfold your ears. You brought that roll here. You have not been off the place since. You have got it hid. In the shack? In a hollow stump. Buried in the garden? We are not looking for it. You are telling us. And pretty quick. Or there is one bewhiskered sheep fancier who is going to be sprinting pronto across the Jordan. Savvy. Be danged if I do, the Ancient One said, a spark of defiance flaring in his eyes. He burst forth suddenly, it is mine. I worked for it, sweated and starved for it. It is honest money, I have done right by folks. I have paid my bills. I earned it, every cent of it. Nobody is going to take it from me. It is mine, I tell you. Slick hooked the toe of his boot under the first rung of the chair, and with a single ruthless motion toppled it backward. Trussed like a fowl, the Ancient One crashed helplessly to the floor. The force of the impact caused the breath to whistle between his teeth. His feet were now elevated. Slick laid hold of his worn brogans and tore them from his feet. Clanton, meanwhile, took up the iron poker from the hearth and inserted its tip into the bed of glowing coals. You will sweat some more, he said, nodding slowly. Unless you remember where that roll is, you will sweat plenty, Bodini. Funny how these short-memoried fellows get action, said Slick, a grin splitting his face, when their toes begin to curl up. The Ancient One, looking up like a crushed insect from the floor, fixed horrified, pleading eyes upon Rip. I know you, he cried shrilly, his voice cracked and high. You are Campbell. Rip Campbell. I saw you once over at Lodgepole. A likely young man. Are you going to stand by and watch these savages torture me? You are not, are you now, Campbell? Rip's face, a mask of stone, grew pale. A fine sheen of moisture glistened on his forehead. But he said nothing. You, lady, cried the fallen one, his voice breaking. You have got a sweet face. A kind, true face. You do not hold with these lads. You cannot. Do not you let them harm me. I have got a gal your age. She lives down at Humboldt Flats. She is not so well fixed. Her man's homestead runs mostly to sand and rimrock. She has got 2 boys, twin boys. They will be 3 years old come June. You know what I was fixing to do with the money I got from the sheep? Gwenny, that is my gal, wants me to come live with her. I am old, she says, and those yearling lads want me too. That their money is to help irrigate the homestead and for schooling for the children. It will take some of the load off of Gwenny's shoulders. The girl stilled his desperate outcries with a sharp gesture. Well, cowboy. She looked Rip full in the face, her own expression unreadable. You asked for it. You insisted on it. Now you are getting a glimpse of it. Does this sort of thing live up to your expectations? That is enough, said Clanton. He spoke to the girl evenly, without heat, but with an authority that was absolute. No funny remarks. Remember what the chief said. It still goes. Slick, let us have the iron. Wait, said Rip, his voice cutting through the tension. Never mind, the iron. Slick straightened, scowling. Clanton shot a quick, keen look at Rip's face, and his hand, which had been reaching for the poker, dropped to his side. What do you mean? Demanded Slick. I mean, said Rip, that if you gorillas had an ounce of brains to go with your large ideas, you would travel farther and faster. I have been watching this old rooster. You do not have to scorch his feet. His eyes have given him away. When you picked up that iron, he looked toward his hole card. Old son, the game is up. It is tough, but you have got to take it. Your loot is up on the shelf. He indicated a row of condiment cans and provisions on the wall above the stove. What is it in? No. No, cried Bodini wildly. It is not in the shack. I buried it, over on the hillside. Which can? Rip stepped toward the shelf, his arm upraised. In the sugar. This alleged baking powder, maybe. The fallen one said nothing then. He lay paralyzed, motionless, save for his staring eyes, which watched Rip take down the receptacles and explore their contents one by one. 3 square coffee cans stood in a row. All were 3/4 full. The first 2, when emptied upon the table, yielded nothing but coffee grounds. When the loose coffee was poured from the third, a package was revealed, wrapped in coarse brown paper. "Ha," said Rip. "Pay dirt." He unwrapped it. A thick roll of bills was revealed, held together by a rubber band. They were of large denomination. Well, I will be damned. Slick chuckled aloud, his huge teeth bared in a wolfish grin. Even Clanton's frosty eye glittered with satisfaction. You called the turn at that. Campbell, you are a wolf. Rip looked at Bodini. The Ancient One had sagged, as though life springs had drained from him. His gaze was fixed on Rip, hopelessly, apathetically. 2 large tears welled forth and traced slow paths down his bearded cheeks. "Bah," said Rip, his voice thick with disgust. "Let us go. This business gripes me." "You said it, Slick. We are a pack of fearless wolves. But we got our meat, so what is the odds, eh?" He replaced the package in the can, swept the loose coffee back in upon it, and closed the lid. He did likewise with the other cans, his movements sharp and angry. "Turn the critter loose," he said harshly. "What are we waiting for?" "Turn him loose nothing," demurred Slick. "We will leave him lay. If nobody calls on him for a couple of days, that is his hard luck." "Who is carrying the loot?" he demanded, indicating the can in Rip's hand. "Joe," said Clanton. "It is yours, lady," said Rip, extending the can to her. His eyes mocked her. "The spoils of war." "No," he admonished, as she would have opened the receptacle. "Best to ease it in your saddlebag, as is. If there is any slip-up, before you get back to the roost, it is just a jag of coffee. And what of it?" "Let us go," said Clanton. "Listen," said Rip. "You wildcats drag along. When you are started, I will unshackle this old rooster and follow. There is no use to leave him here to die by inches. There is nothing to be gained. He cannot do any harm. We are in the clear and on our way. Am I right?" Clanton's careless vote carried the day. "He is soft," he said to Slick with a shrug. "A couple more jobs, and he will not be so finicky. Run along," he told Rip. "I will turn him loose. I will leave his rifle empty. We do not want him taking pot shots at us for luck." The 3 spurred forth from the silent homestead. Clanton followed some moments later. He and the girl pulled away without comment, mounting back into the pinnacles. Slick grinned at Rip in the shadow of the scrub pine. "Clanton and Joe travel together," he said. "Chief's orders. Not more than 2 can ride in a herd outside of the gap. Rip, you did noble. You read that old coot's mind like a magician. It takes a green hand like you to show me and Clanton the fine points. The chief will be pleased. And just between the pair of us, cowboy," he leered meaningfully, "you needed it. Up until now, you did not rate with Sanders no more than a busted straight. Maybe you could fill, and maybe you could not. Rip did not react to the obvious bid for confidential exchange. He merely rode on in silence, his sombrero pulled low, his features dark and grim. Slick would have said more, but Rip's stony quiet was a wall he could not breach. Chapter 7. It was well after sundown when they rode through the absolute blackness of the cleft, the horses picking their way carefully over the treacherous rock. The lookout's voice drifted down from his perch, informing them in answer to Slick's shouted question that Clanton and the girl had not yet returned. Sanders was waiting in front of the bunkhouse, a squat, unmoving shadow against the faint light spilling from the open door. At his sharp command, a youth lounging nearby led their tired horses away. The outlaw chief fixed Slick with a hard, questioning look, his face unreadable in the gloom. "He is a curly wolf," said Slick, the words high praise. He jerked a thumb toward Rip. He then sketched briefly the events of the day, enlarging upon the manner in which their new recruit had unerringly smelled out the hiding place of the treasure, his voice full of a grudging admiration. "Fine," approved Sanders, a flicker of satisfaction in his cold eyes. "You did well, Campbell." Complacence was in his bearing, the quiet self-approval of a shrewd judge of men who has been proven right. "Where are Clanton and Joe?" But even as he spoke, the noise of approaching hooves strengthened in the cleft above. A moment later the pair emerged, the girl in the lead, her careless voice plain in the still night air. The weary horses picked their way slowly down the final slope. "You did well," Sanders repeated, nodding once. "Grub is waiting at the cook shack." Again, Slick and Rip ate alone and in silence. The former's prodigious appetite left no time for idle conversation. Rip sat with his back to the door, forcing down the food. He ate without relish, despite the long, foodless day, his senses tuned to the sounds emanating from the camp at his back. He heard the girl's horse and Clanton's being led away. The voices of the trio, Clanton, Joe, and Sanders, faded toward the latter's cabin at the end of the row. They would be gone 3 minutes, Rip judged, perhaps 5. He pushed his plate away and motioned to the widow Grattan to pour him more coffee. Having drained the cup, he reached for the makings. Half turned toward the door, he rolled a cigarette with deliberate slowness and waited. Footsteps approached, crunching on the gravel outside. Rip held the unlit cigarette in his left hand. His right fell easily to the bench, his fingers brushing the worn leather of his gun holster. He turned himself a little further about, an awkward position from which to eat, but one that commanded the door. Not Sanders's, but Clanton's slightly taller figure loomed on the threshold, silhouetted against the stars. His face was a mask of thin-lipped severity, his eyes piercing. He said nothing to Rip. He looked at him once, his glance flickering down to the hand resting on the bench. To Slick he said tersely, "The chief wants you. Pronto." The big man rose up, growling a complaint under his breath. His profane muttering died when he met Clanton's unblinking gaze. Wiping his mouth with the back of a hairy hand, he strode out forthwith, and the pair disappeared into the night. Rip arose then and stretched himself, yawning to cover his tension. He hitched his gun belt a little higher and took up his sombrero. He did not go out the front door of the cook shack. Instead, he turned toward the kitchen. The widow Grattan eyed him in silence, her face impassive, and in silence he passed her, pushed through the back door, and mounted in methodical fashion up the starlit slope behind the cabins. There was a niche in the rock wall, with a flat ledge at its base. He seated himself upon this ledge, crossed his legs, and tossed his sombrero into the shadows behind him. His cigarette had gone out. He rolled another, lighted it behind cupped hands, and leaned back, his head resting on the unyielding stone. The girl came presently from the direction of Sanders's headquarters, alone. She entered the cook shack, and from there mounted toward her own cabin. She entered, closing the door behind her. Rip did not see her emerge, his attention being fixed upon the movements in the camp below, But some moments later, hearing someone approaching stealthily from his right, he peered around the abutting rock. She was close at hand, stealing along the base of the wall. She placed her fingers on her lips as a signal for silence. A moment later, she was seated beside him in the deep shadow of the cleft. She was breathing heavily, as if she had been running. Looking at her through the gloom, his face close to hers, he saw that her eyes were wide, her lips parted. "Rip," she said, and for the first time her voice was vibrant with human qualities, stripped of its usual mockery. "What is it all about?" Rip shook his head. He inhaled deeply on his cigarette, the tip glowing like a hot coal, then cast it down and ground it beneath his heel. "Run along," he said, his voice rough. "You have got your own life to live. Me, I am done." "Please believe me, Rip." She laid her hand on his arm, her touch surprisingly firm. "I am your friend. I must know. Sanders ordered me to my cabin. The others are looking for you. The widow, bless her, told them you had gone back to the bunkhouse. But they will find us here in a moment. So talk fast." He strove to shake off her hand, but could not. At her touch, and the unexpected sympathy in her voice, it was as though all the forlorn heartache within him rose up like a vast bitter tide. "Better run along," he repeated, his voice thick. "Why did you give me the wrong coffee can down at Bodine's?" she pressed. "It fooled Slick. It fooled Clanton and me. You did it deliberately. But why?" Rip stared at her, then looked away into the darkness. "I will tell you why. It is because I am a total loss. I am not even a decent outlaw. Holding up helpless citizens. Stealing honest money. Seeing the tears in the eyes of old men. For 40 years we let a man like Bodini sweat and save and starve. Then we swoop in like a pack of buzzards. It is not right. To blazes with you all." He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders slumping. "Doggone it, I do not amount to anything. I am neither afoot nor horseback. I cannot live straight. I cannot play my hand as a crook. What is the answer? Listen, Rip. Is there not anything of promise left in the world for you? Anything at all? What about your girl down in the valley?" "That is something else again," said Rip bitterly. "I could not see it then. I see it now. It is funny how you size up things at the finish when it is too late. I do not love her. I never did." "No," she agreed softly, "or you would not have given up hope so easily. She was on a kind of pedestal with me," he explained, the words tumbling out now. Strangely, he felt no reticence at thus baring his innermost heart to this girl in the dark. "When she fell off, I thought the whole world had crashed. I can see now that the world had not crashed at all. Nor her, either. She had not even been on the pedestal, to begin with. I had fallen in love with something that was not there, if you get what I mean." "I do," she nodded, her voice low. "I understand. It was an ideal you held up in your heart. You thought she measured up to it." "Her name was Cora. Old banker Hampton's daughter," said Rip. "She traveled with the moneyed crowd. Educated in the East, and all that. I was just a spectacular cowboy. I amused her. Get that? Amused her. A lovesick sagebrush Romeo. No, I do not blame her. It is me that is to blame. But it is the facts that bite. I was not spectacular anymore when I got my own land and tried to work my own spread. It was when I lost everything and went running to her for sympathy like a wall-eyed calf in a snowstorm that I found out where I stood. And now," he broke off abruptly, checking his bitterness, and fell silent. There was a guarded commotion in the camp below. The boisterous sounds from the cabins and bunkhouse had ceased. Men were talking in low, urgent voices. There was the creak of saddle leather and the tramp of feet in the gloom. I do not know why I am telling you all this. What is it to you? And on the other hand, why not? You had best run along, lady. But she did not run along. Looking at her closer, he saw, to his great amazement, that her eyes were luminous as though filled with unshed tears. Rip, she said, you and I are two babes in the woods. That is me, all right, he agreed with a grim chuckle. Lost in an impenetrable forest. But you are sitting pretty. You have got your place in the scheme of things, such as it is. You had better slide down and tell Sanders he does not have to come looking for me with his whole army. Tell him, if he is as good as he says he is, to come up alone, and we will draw together. Why should I tell Sanders anything? You are Sanders's property, said Rip flatly. I am no man's property, she bit out, her voice sharp. Is that who you meant last night when I was questioning you, when you said a girl like you? This is no uplift society you are a member of, said Rip wearily. Those fellows down there, debating the best means to surround me, would not get honorable mention in a stalwart citizen contest. What do you claim to be? I will prove what I am, she said, her voice fierce, when the time comes. The facts will speak for themselves. When? Tomorrow, perhaps. Tomorrow, said Rip, a humorless grin touching his lips, will be too late for me. Whatever difference that makes. The group at the foot of the slope, having finished their consultation, now mounted toward them. They did not scatter, but came in a solid body. Sanders was in the lead. The others walked tensely, poised for action. The outlaw chief himself seemed calm and unconcerned. Listen, said the girl swiftly, her voice a desperate whisper. You will live until tomorrow. If you play your cards right. Do not antagonize Sanders. Let me do the talking. I know him through and through. I saved you the first time last night. I think I can do it again. Why? Because you and I may be able to work together, Rip, she whispered the word, her lips close to his ear, to find our way out of these woods. They drew a little apart as Sanders came to a halt before them, his head lowered and out-thrust as he peered through the shadows. His killers spread out, forming a silent semicircle to the left and right that hemmed them in against the rock wall. Rip stood up, the girl rising at his side. It was to her that Sanders spoke, his voice dry and casual. I told you to go to your cabin and stay there, Joe. Why are you here? For several reasons, she replied, her voice once again hard and matter-of-fact. Name one, said Sanders. Make it good. Talk fast. I am partly responsible for this poker-faced recruit of yours, she said. I vouched for him when you were giving him the 3rd degree. I thought he would pan out. Down on the job today, he made monkeys out of the rest of us. I wanted to know why. I am entitled to know. So I came up here to find out. Sanders considered this, studying her face in the dim light. He said at length, nodding slowly. Doing a little sleuthing, on your own account, eh? For the good of the cause, no doubt. Certainly, said the girl. If you guerrillas had ganged up on him, he would have shot it out and never said a word. I used my own trusty methods. A little sympathy, and he almost wept on my shoulder. Broke right down and confessed. It was no mystery after all, Sanders. He did not hold out the money. Believe it or not, he felt sorry for Bodini. Could not bear to see him suffer. Tears in the eyes of stalwart men and all that. So he acted on impulse and took the wrong can. Sanders continued to study her, saying nothing. You slick, said the girl, turning to him. And Clanton. You were there. Did you see him squirm when Bodini was getting desperate? He sweated plenty, Slick admitted. I could not figure what ailed him. What is the answer, then? Sanders demanded of the girl. She shrugged her shoulders. Use your own judgment, she replied. Personally, I think he is cured. Stealing crusts from helpless citizens is not the action he craved. When it comes to real business, he will probably make good. Well, said the outlaw, your work is done in any event. Run along now, Joe. He waved her curtly toward her cabin. She did not hesitate or reveal the slightest further interest. Without looking back, she strode in graceful fashion down the slope and disappeared into her cabin. Fellows, said Sanders, addressing his cohorts, this pilgrim has cost us heavy money. The pot is shy of $3,000 due to his bleary-eyed play. Give it a name. They looked at each other uneasily in the starlight. None broke the heavy silence. If Joe is right, Sanders ruminated almost to himself, and he is cured, it may be cheap at the price. He comes from the valley. He knows his way around. He will be mighty useful on the big job. Chief, questioned one of the group hesitantly, when is this big job coming off? It was obvious that none expected a direct reply to this daring query. It was not Sanders's custom to reveal his plans until the hour was at hand. Yet the outlaw did not hesitate. Tomorrow, he said. His cohorts stiffened as one. Delighted, profane oaths escaped them. Instantly, it seemed, the very air was charged with a suppressed violent excitement. Hot dog, breathed Slick. And what is the layout? That, said Sanders, will develop tomorrow. Meanwhile, what about Campbell? Speaking for myself, said Slick, I do not give a doggone. What is the odds? He is not gun-shy, that is for sure. If he is over those sentimental heebie-jeebies, let him trail along. As far as that jackpot today is concerned, take it out of his share of the big winnings. From what you have told us, there will be plenty. There were restless murmurs of assent. Already, the fate of their prisoner was dwarfed and lost in the electrifying prospect of the forthcoming campaign. Okay then, said Sanders. Drag along, fellows. I will fetch Campbell down. The others hurried away, with the haste of men who bear heavy tidings. Sanders walked slowly, motioning Rip to fall in step at his side. He spoke confidentially, but beneath this pose, Rip sensed that the other was in the grip of a furious, controlled rage. That was a bad play, Rip. You are your father's son. He was always chicken-hearted like that. The men were plenty hostile when it developed that your foot had slipped. I have got to hold them in line and keep them satisfied. It is only the luck of fools that gives you another chance. Plus Joe's efforts. The fellows would never have believed that you did not appropriate the money for yourself. But the way we framed it made it plausible. Said Rip. You mean you sent her up to work on me? Naturally, said Sanders, his voice brittle. You are not suggesting, Rip, old son, that you thought she came of her own accord for a confidential chat with you. I am just that dumb, said Rip guardedly. She is a good actress. She played her part like an old trooper. Tally up one more to experience. He shrugged his shoulders. What of it? Cowboy, said Sanders, stopping and turning to face him, I will suggest this once again and finally. In the game, in which I have permitted you to take a hand, let there be no more false carding. Obey orders. Watch your step. Interest yourself in nothing but business. Savvy. Raise the ante then, Rip retorted, meeting his gaze without flinching. Do not ask me to buck a 10-cent limit like this Bodini deal. Let us see some real action. You will see it, Sanders promised dryly, a strange light in his eyes. Tomorrow. Chapter 8. 4 riders entered the cleft at near midnight, their horses blowing hard, slick with sweat. Immediately thereafter, the camp was astir. Lights sprang to life in the drafty cabins down the line as Clanton, thin-lipped and moving like a wraith, went from door to door, telling all hands to roll out and stand ready at the bunkhouse for orders from Sanders. It was like a military alarm, a silent bugle call in the dead of night. Married members of the crew came on the run from the north end of camp, their hurried movements trailed by the thin, sharp wails of children roused from sleep. In a matter of minutes, the big room of the bunkhouse was crowded with armed men, the air thick with the smell of stale smoke, unwashed bodies, and gun oil. With the exception of the 2 lookouts at the gap and the guard at the cleft, all were present or accounted for. In addition were the 4 newcomers. These men, strangers to Rip, were dusty and travel-stained, their eyes red-rimmed with fatigue. It developed that they were the outside men, Sanders's network of spies, who had brought fresh information from the valley. Sanders came presently, striding into the room like a conqueror. He was wearing 2 guns now, the holsters tied low and strapped to his thighs. In some indefinable manner, his slight limp had become a swagger. His pale blue eyes were alive with a cold flame, and his drooping mustache seemed to meet the aggressive outthrust of his jaw. His 2 lieutenants, the hulking Slick and the spectral Clanton, were at his side. The outlaw chief stood before his band in the big room, his thumbs hooked in his gun belt. As he looked from one to the other of the intent, impassive faces before him, the silence grew profound, heavy with anticipation. His glance bored into Rip's in passing. It was the briefest of inspections, a mere flicker of acknowledgement, but in that instant, fleetingly, Rip glimpsed what he had carelessly suspected before, that the outlaw's former pretense of friendship had been the merest gesture. Not he, Rip, nor Slick and Clanton, nor the girl herself, ranked as more than pawns in a deeper, more intricate design. Sanders, emotionless and utterly ruthless, shrewdly molding his band to his will, stood alone. When he spoke, his words were brief and blunt, each one falling like a hammer blow in the quiet room. Because he was able to view the proceedings, as he had grown to look upon life, as from a pinnacle apart, Rip was able to analyze the crafty manner in which Sanders handled the moment to his ends. He suggested just enough to add fuel to the raging fires of excitement about him, to heighten the suspense, to promise unimaginable rewards, but no more. "Men," said he, "the situation I have been waiting months for is ready. The hour has struck. Before another sun has set, the valley down below will split wide open. By this time tomorrow night, each of us will be miles away from here. Behind us, the biggest job ever pulled in the West will be history. In our saddlebags will be heavy winnings that will make all our previous jackpots look like penny ante." He indicated the spies from the valley. "These fellows have brought news that has set my plans forward by a day. I had intended to strike at sunset tomorrow. Instead, we must be there by sunup. We leave in an hour. Each man will saddle his horse, take his 6-gun and rifle, and a bandolier of extra ammunition. He will also take light trail equipment according to his taste, but bear in mind that his horse must not be loaded too heavy for fast travel." He indicated a pair of youths nearby. "You 2 saddle immediately, and relieve the lookouts so that they, in turn, can make ready. You will join the column when the rest of us ride out through the gap." "You mean to say, Chief," a voice questioned from the crowd, "that we are not leaving any guards behind us?" "We are leaving no guards," said Sanders, his voice flat, "because we are not coming back. This has been a secluded and restful hangout. Its usefulness is done. The featherbed part of this campaign is absolutely over. After tomorrow, each of us will be on the dodge." To the reckless younger members of the crew, upon whom the discipline and inaction of camp life had palled, this statement added a fresh, exhilarating zest to the adventure. But certain of the older outlaws grew uneasy and troubled. "Chief," said one of these hesitantly, a man with worry etched deep in his face, "what about the women folks? And the kiddies?" "For the women and children," said Sanders, his voice devoid of any warmth, "there is food here in plenty. And shelter. They will stay behind. Each of you will make your own plans with your families about where you will meet again. If you fail to meet again, if by some chance an accident tomorrow will prevent you from seeing them for a long time, the authorities will take care of them. They will be placed in homes, no doubt. Provided for, at public expense." He spoke with a chill and ruthless humor. "It is a part of the tariff we are accustomed to. Good citizens, as usual, must pay the bill." Hard-bitten youths guffawed loudly at that. The man who had spoken, and the small group he represented, fell silent, their faces grim. Rip saw their inner torture, and knew that they had no choice. Not Sanders himself, but the rocky, unforgiving trail they had chosen was here claiming its final, bitter toll. Women who had kept faith through pitiless odds, children whose innocent minds had not yet grasped the grim reality of their surroundings, these were treasures that must now be left behind. "Got it," said Sanders. "Let us go," came the answering roar from the younger men. "All hands in the saddle by midnight," said Sanders. "We will ride out in fours, 10 minutes apart. Bull, Secord, Yakima." He named the commander in charge of each platoon and instructed these leaders to foregather at once at his cabin. "All right, fellows. Get going." At midnight, the first detachment rode forth from the cleft. 10 minutes later, the next group followed. Rip's quartet, including Clanton, the girl, and Sanders himself, was the last to leave. The stars were low and brilliant at that hour, burning like cold diamonds in a black velvet sky. The shadows they cast were absolute. In silence, the bristling platoons mounted the slope, sparks trailing from cigarettes like falling stars. Momentarily, before entering the cleft, each rider was a stark silhouette against the jeweled sky. Rip, watching, saw that most of these men rode on without a single backward glance. One bulky giant flung an arm aloft in a final salute, and far down the line, in a lighted doorway, a woman with a sleeping baby in her arms returned a brief, heartbreaking gesture of farewell. "For men must work, and women must weep," quoted the girl carelessly, her voice a jarring note in the solemn quiet. "Even in this noble life." "Touching what?" "No wisecracks, Joe." Sanders's brittle voice came from the gloom at their right. "That goes for you too, Campbell." Rip rode first through the cleft, followed by Clanton. Sanders and the girl brought up the rear. There was no lookout now on the lofty perch, nor at the gap below. The rear guard, passing through, was the last of the band. Except for the women and children, who had been left behind to shift for themselves, the notorious stronghold was deserted. At Clanton's gesture, Rip reined to the right or south, threading the juniper-clad slopes beneath the mesa that led down to the valley floor. Sanders and the girl were some 10 lengths behind. While the gap was still in view, Rip twisted in the saddle to look back. Clanton, mistaking his intent, spoke tersely. "You and I stay in front, cowboy. Sanders and Joe ride alone." But Rip, contemplatively, with a gloomy awe, was looking back as at a doorway he had deemed forever closed. He had spurred his horse toward the grim rendezvous 2 days before, never dreaming, nor even hoping, to penetrate beyond the gunmen at the gap. Having entered the stronghold, he had not thought to emerge alive. Yet he still lived. Not so easily, it was plain, did inscrutable fate permit men to avoid the unsought privileges and responsibilities of life. And what lay ahead? In what sinister drama, presently to unfold, would he play an unwilling part? He did not know, nor care, he told himself somberly. He was merely riding down the current of a dark tide, unresistingly, apathetically. What did it matter to him what the big job was, just so the action was lurid and the end swift? Yet certain troubling thoughts stirred in the deeps of him, like sleepers wrestling with disordered dreams. Borne on the breath of the night wind, sweeping up from the valley, was the scent of sage, of alfalfa and new-mown clover. From far away came the bawl of a calf, lost from a slumbering herd. The lights of Lodgepole glittered like a cluster of fallen stars against the horizon line. And from near at hand, on a dusty highway, the voice of a belated horseman was raised in a joyous, off-key song concerning some distant region where men were men, and a river was called the Rio Grande. That horseman, Rip knew, had once been of his own kind, part of a scheme of things known and dear to him. How often had he, too, ridden with the lights of Lodgepole at his back, penniless but with a song in his throat, riding into the flaming dawn. The valley had once been his valley, with life's dusty trails beckoning fair and far. "Clanton," he said abruptly, his voice rough, "where are we heading? What is this all about?" "Not now, cowboy," said Clanton. "Sanders names the play. You will know later." It was the only interchange between the pair for 4 long hours. Sanders and the girl talked together as they followed at a fast lope. Only once, when soft going abruptly deadened the sound of their progress, did Rip catch a fragment of their conversation. It was Sanders's brittle voice, sharp with finality, and that is final. "You know me, Joe. I will call all bluffs." They rode the stars from the sky and into the chill gray splendor of dawn. Daylight was growing rapidly when they approached a sleeping homestead from the rear. Rip knew the place and the owner. It was called the Lockhart Ranch on the Lodgepole Placer Road. The present owner was a stolid and industrious citizen named Joel Price. "We will wait here," Sanders whispered when they had achieved the ancient gnarled orchard flanking the barn lot. "Ease up there, Clanton, and see if Slick and Pike have done their stuff. They have had plenty of time." All dismounted, and Clanton stole through the shadows toward the farmhouse. He was out of sight but a moment. He reappeared beside the woodshed, gesturing them forward. Without any further attempt at caution or concealment, the outlaw strode forward with Rip and the girl at his heels. Clanton led the way through the back door and into the kitchen. Here on the floor, trussed like fowls and gagged with dirty rags, were Price and his wife. The man's stolid face was pale and grim, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and rage. The woman's eyes were half closed, her matronly features flushed. Breathing in ragged gasps, she was all but swooning with terror. Slick and Pike leaned against the far wall, puffing on complacent cigarettes. "It was a cinch, Chief," said Slick, chuckling. "We nailed him out at the cow stable. Then we snared the old girl when she was building the fire. It was no chore at all." "Get them out of the way," Sanders directed, after a brief cold inspection of their bonds and gags. He jerked a thumb toward the bedroom of the primitive establishment. "Horse them in yonder." The pair were unceremoniously bundled away and forgotten. All moved into the meagerly furnished living room, which was still gray with early shadows. Sanders looked at his watch. He was apparently emotionless as always, yet Rip sensed that a crisis of some sort, a critical juncture in his mysterious plans, was at hand. The others sensed it too. All stood immobile, their bodies taut, awaiting his word. "All right, Clanton," he said at length. "Get out there and get set with your wire clippers. You, Slick, stand at the door. When I give the high sign, pass it on to Clanton. It has got to be fast." He snapped his fingers, "like that." Clanton instantly stepped outside. Watching him through the dusty window, Rip saw him running up the poplar-bordered lane toward the highway. Sanders and Slick, standing in the doorway, also followed his every movement. Paralleling the road, borne on sentinel poles that merged into the horizon to the north and south, was the telephone line connecting Lodgepole, the county seat, with the mining town of Placer, 16 miles distant. Immediately in front of the homestead, a rangy juniper tree had been used as a makeshift post. Up this tree Clanton climbed nimbly, assisted by the stumps of ancient branches. He perched on the crossarm, and for a moment was busied with his pliers. Then he flung an arm aloft, signaling he was ready. Sanders tightened his belt and approached the ancient wall telephone. He stood for a space considering it, his unwinking gaze fixed on the floorboards. Slick stood poised at the doorway, tense, stooped a little, his hand upraised. Clanton was likewise poised on his high perch, his face turned toward them. And now, Rip was given a new glimpse of the twisted genius, the crafty resources that had enabled Sanders to survive and flourish through 3 decades of lawlessness in the high country. Here was play acting supreme, a difficult impersonation of differing types that might have taxed the ability of the most finished trooper. It also spoke volumes for the care with which he had prepared for this very moment. For it was Sanders who took down the receiver, who vigorously rang the exchange at Placer. But to the listening ear, it was the voice of Joel Price, heavy, humorous, and somewhat deliberate, that carried over the wire. "Hello. Hello, Placer. This is Price, at the Lockhart. I want to talk to Jim Connors, at Lodgepole." "Yes, the sheriff." "What?" "Sure, get him out of bed." "It is not important, but who is paying that bozo's keep? Let him get up when the taxpayers get up. This is haying time." And when the sheriff's sleepy voice croaked hollowly in the receiver, it was another personality entirely, excitable, all but frenzied, that roared across the intervening miles. By closing his eyes, Rip could almost have taken an oath that that fiery and waspish old-timer Hard Rock Malloy, the town marshal of Placer, was himself standing there in the room. "Jim," bellowed Sanders. "Great Judas, Jim, come a-running. This is Hard Rock at Placer. All Hades has busted loose here this morning. Your blasted gunmen from the hills have split the town wide open. Swooped in like buzzards, 20, 30, maybe 40 of them, and picked us clean to the bone. It is a shambles. It is ruin and desolation. Main Street is littered with the dead and dying. But we have got the skunks cornered in a draw just outside of town." "What?" "Yes, the whole kit and caboodle of them. All but a couple who cut out of the herd. Fetch your posse. Rout out your vigilantes. Bring every man that can sling lead. Bring the whole town. We will hold them until you come. Blast the blasted polecats, we have got them where we want them. We will wipe the slate clean." He motioned sharply to Slick. The latter's upraised arm fell. The faint droning of the wire ceased abruptly. Sanders turned to the girl, his pale eyes flaming with a terrifying, triumphant light. "We got them," he said, his voice a harsh rasp. "It worked. The sheriff promised 200 men in 4 hours. The whole town is primed for a slaughter. The skids are greased. The trap is set." He broke off, as though checking a weak display of emotion, and looked at Rip. Through the window, Rip saw that Clanton was descending rapidly from the pole. The telephone wire had not fallen. Clanton had secured it in such a manner that there was no visible evidence that it had been cut. "What is the play?" Rip asked, though he was already beginning to understand. "A military trick, as old as time," said Sanders. "Draw the deaf Campbell away, then take the fort. You might as well know it now, Campbell. You will soon be in the thick of it. That wire that Clanton has just cut is the only trunk line up the valley. There will be no communication between the 2 towns for hours. All the local, fire-spitting heroes will burn up the dust on the road to Placer. It is a grandstand play they would not miss for the world. All these demon desperadoes caught in a hole, ready to be shot down like coyotes. Meanwhile, he spread his hands, a gesture of magnificent evil simplicity. We will take Lodgepole." "How do you mean, take Lodgepole?" "Like Grant took Richmond," said Sanders. "Like the barbarians took Rome." Clanton rushed in, breathing heavily, his face flushed with success. The gazes of the outlaw chief and his right-hand man met for a brief, triumphant instant. In that same instant, Rip glanced at the girl and encountered her wide dark eyes fixed upon him. She seemed calm, detached, aloof, but at the base of her softly molded neck, belying her disinterested pose, he could plainly see a hidden artery rapidly, violently pulsing. Chapter 9. They quit the flats without ceremony, a small, grim party bearing north, under the sparse cover of the juniper-dusted slopes. The balance of the crew, Rip learned, were already in concealment on the raw outskirts of Lodgepole, lying in wait like wolves. As speedily as a stealthy route would permit, Sanders was hurrying toward the final rendezvous. Rip rode with Sanders, according to the latter's blunt, non-negotiable command. Behind them came Slick and Pike. It was only afterward, when the pieces began to click into place in his mind, that Rip grasped the significance of the fact that these two trailed them so closely, riding wide apart, their positions perfect for a crossfire. At the rear, a silent and watchful shadow, Clanton, followed with the girl. Faster and faster now, it seemed to Rip, the dark tide was carrying him on. The roar of the breakers, in a manner of speaking, was close at hand, a dull thunder in his blood. He was at a loss to account for the fact that now, in spirit, he was hanging back, digging in his heels against the inevitable. He thought he knew why Sanders motioned them to a halt on a high, sun-baked ridge and pointed out across the valley. Far to the southwest, on dusty roads that paralleled the neat section lines and led in the general direction of Placer, were many rising funnels of dust. These plumes trailed tiny, frantic horsemen, undulating like heat-shimmering insects as they rode toward the southwest. By twos and threes and in larger, dust-choked groups they rode, an army of righteous men on the march. "Fools," said Sanders, the word a low snarl. "See them ride. Wild-eyed, to get to the killing. There will be dead horses lining their back trail when they get the news. Too late, you grandstanding scissor-bills. You will pay, and you will pay plenty." His voice was less brittle now, more of a guttural growl. The iron self-control of the man was slipping, flaking away to reveal the raw predator beneath. In that moment it was the marauding wolf, the beast of prey that peered forth from his pale, cold eyes. And in that same moment, Rip knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that his heart was not in this thing to which he had put his hand. Men he knew and respected were riding yonder across the valley he loved. There, at his feet, less than a 20-minute ride distant, was the town in which he had spent his boyhood, and whose invisible ties held him still. What did it matter that he was unwanted, that life had seemed to cast him out? His responsibilities in the final and ultimate showdown were not with these men with whom he had joined in a blind and savage mood, but against them to the bitter end. It was a staggering realization. Under its crushing impact, he rode slumped in the saddle, his chin on his chest, the world a blur. He peered at the horseman beside him, blinking. It was not Sanders but Clanton, and that still-faced youth was regarding him with a sharp, unnerving intensity. Rip roused himself as from a dream, becoming conscious of his surroundings again. Slick and Pike were some 3 lengths back. Behind them came Sanders and the girl. Clanton was setting the pace, and the trail, skirting an outcropping of rimrock and scrub pine, whose western extremity bordered on the city limits of the small-range metropolis. "Cowboy," Clanton said, his voice a low conversational murmur that did not carry, "we are almost there. The gang is waiting in the draw yonder. We will be there in 5 minutes." From the corner of his mouth he added, "Grin. Roll a cigarette. Ride easy. The chief is watching us." Clanton reined his horse closer, so their knees were almost touching. "I am for Sanders," he said, his eyes fixed straight ahead. "I will double-cross no man. But the chief has overplayed his hand with the girl. She is entitled to a break." He reached for his tobacco pouch. "If she wants to save your scalp, I will do her the favor, and to blazes with the chief. You are only a side bet with him, anyway. Got the picture?" Rip had not grasped the picture, not entirely. But he nodded, and lighted the cigarette he had just rolled, his hands steady. Me and Slick and Pike, Clanton continued, his voice a near whisper, have orders from the chief to drop you on sight at the first funny move you make. Instead, I will swing my horse across behind you. Slick and Pike will not fire through me. When I do, you sink your spurs into that critter of yours. 2 jumps, and you are in the scrub pine. Bust through and keep traveling. Rip eyed him fixedly, the smoke from his cigarette a thin blue line between them. I mean now, said Clanton softly, urgently. Before we get to the gang yonder. After that, you are sunk. Rip puffed on his cigarette, digesting what he had just heard. He knew, as he rode in the brilliant, unforgiving sunlight, through a familiar world whose every detail was suddenly vivid and sharply etched, that his nerves had never been more cool and poised, his brain never more clear than at this precise moment. He said, those are hefty words. But we have got 5 minutes yet, walking slow. A few questions, cowboy. Will you answer me straight? If you will pass your word that what I say dies with you, said Clanton. You have got it, said Rip. Shoot then, said Clanton. A bead of perspiration glistened on his mask-like face. Any gent who could look into Sanders's rifle like you did up yonder, grinning like that, is the real beef. But talk fast. What did you mean, then, when you said I was sunk after we reached the gang? Because, said Clanton, the boss hates the ground you walk on. When we leave this job, we leave you behind us. Toes up. So the citizens will think you were the one who led the wolves right back to the home folks' roost. Said Rip. It was as though a cold wind had breathed upon the back of his neck. How does he get that way? On 2 counts, said Clanton. First, Joe is sweet on you. Secondly, and these are roots that strike deeper, he hated your father, Longchance. Some old score he wants to pay off. Your pa, so he tells me, would have sold his soul to raise you straight. Sho, said Rip, chilled anew. That is first-class hating. Joe's father was poison to him also, said Clanton. That is why she is here. Sanders does not look at her like you or me. To him, she is King Colton's daughter. And he will make her pay plenty for that. What else, cowboy? Talk fast. If ever there was an unforgiven minute, it is now. You mean, said Rip, that she is not riding with this outfit of her own free will? She was teaching school up in the Coeur d'Alene, said Clanton, in some flea-bitten and windswept community. Sanders wrote her a letter. It was a pippin. Claimed he was lonely and childless, that he had a housekeeper and a big ranch, that he looked on her as a daughter, the daughter of an old pal. Come, he invites, and make your home here. She came. Sanders took her through the gap. That was going on 2 months ago. She has been there ever since. And made the best of a bad bargain? Questioned Rip. He held his breath, waiting for the reply. The answer, he knew suddenly, would point to a crossroads just ahead. You notice that Sanders limps, said Clanton. Joe plugged him. It taught him respect, at least for her shooting ability. She is a crack shot, and goes heeled all the while. So she pretended to give up hope, she tells me. She told the chief she would marry him after the big job. Promised to hide out with him, up in the horse heaven country and start over. But he would have to make a big stake first. She made that final. And it sounded reasonable to the chief. It was the only language he understood, you savvy. The only way for her to postpone a final showdown. Doggone, Rip breathed. But look, Clanton. There is a hole in your story. She rode on the Penny Ante Bodini job with us. As one of Sanders's aces. On that Bodini job, said Clanton, the chief figured to kill several birds with 1 stone. He missed them all, by the width of 1 coffee can. It was the first time Joe had been outside the gap. It was your first job also. He wanted to brand you both. Bodini would scatter the word in the valley, you savvy, that the two of you were in the gang. But what was to prevent Joe and me from making a run for it? Nothing much, Clanton admitted, except me and Slick. We both rode all day, with our hands on our artillery. There was also a half-dozen fellows, maybe a dozen, trailing along just for percentage. Son of a gun, said Rip. But if Joe knew Sanders's plans all the while, why did not she refuse to ride on the Bodini job? Why is she riding now? Because, said Clanton with a twisted smile, she placed her bets on you. Do not ask me how a gal figures things, but this is her slant. When she first saw you up yonder on the trail, when you rode in among our guerrillas like a gent riding to a feast, grinning like that, knowing you did not have a Chinaman's chance, she figured you were one of them answers to a maiden's prayer. What I mean, one of those knights in shining armor right out of a storybook. She needed a gent with a good right arm to back her play, and here you were. So she put in a word for you with Sanders. She did it again, after the Bodini job. She was hoping to get to talk to you, to break down your hard-boiled ideas, and persuade you to help her make a getaway. Rip cut in, his voice urgent. Listen. Last night, after the Bodini job, when I was sitting up there under the wall, waiting for the firing squad, did Sanders send her up to talk to me? He did not, said Clanton with emphasis. The chief gave orders right at the start that she was not to talk to you. She saw her chance last night and took it. But Sanders crossed her up. He took a good hold on the widow Grattan's hair. After the third twist, when her scalp was about to come off, she told him where you were. So Joe had to cut her parley short. She hoped to be able to work on you today. She hoped to the end. Now she is through. All she craves is that you have a chance. You are young. You are entitled to blaze your own trails. Over yonder, beyond the pinnacles, the fields are still green. Some bleary-eyed sentiment like that. Wow, Rip groaned. It was as though pent-up forces within him, newly released, rose up like a hot, shameful tide. What a noble, upstanding bonehead I turned out to be. Clanton, I am the blindest Jasper that ever had a chance to square himself with the world. And the dumbest, said Clanton bluntly. Because look, cowboy. You have crowded your luck too far. The 11th hour struck about a minute ago. Here comes Sanders. And yonder is the gang. Massed in the junipers, at the head of the draw were many mounted men. The hot gleam of metal was in the shadows, and the sound of many restless hooves milling. Sanders, leaving the girl with Pike and Slick, was drawing up abreast of them. It is too late for a break now, said Clanton, his voice a flat whisper. You have talked yourself into a one-way ticket across the river. Good hunting. Sanders reined up beside them and shot a keen, suspicious glance at each of them. Strange fires burned in his pale eyes. Rip glanced back, hoping to meet the girl's gaze. But she was riding between Slick and Pike, her head bowed, her face hidden by the brim of her hat. We are here, said Sanders. In 15 minutes, history will be written. Fall back, Clanton. Overlook no bets. Campbell, you ride with me. Chapter 10. In the sheltered, dusty draw, within easy rifle shot of the main street of Lodgepole, Sanders gave his terse final orders for the attack. It was here that Rip learned for the first time the full, audacious details of the big job. Its sheer, brutal daring was the very thing that made for its probable success. The stage had been set with the clock-like precision of a master strategist. Both in the plan of attack and in the preparation for the retreat, Sanders had employed the cold, calculating logic of a military mind. As the trading center for many hundred square miles of raw, open range, Lodgepole boasted 3 banks. The largest was the First National, known generally as Hampton's. The resources of the Stockman's National ran a close second. Lastly was the Merchants and Miners State Bank, a small but robust institution that catered to the vast mining operations up near Placer. Because the community was so remote from the great financial centers of the country, all three were known to carry huge cash balances. The total in currency and gold in their combined vaults, Sanders estimated with a hungry gleam in his eye, was in excess of $250,000. In one fell swoop, holding the defenseless Main Street in a state of siege until the banks were being raided, they would seize upon this enormous jackpot and depart with all possible haste. The plan of attack was brutally simple. It was now 9:15, the time when the bank's side doors, according to the easygoing custom of the range, would be open for business. The entire band, with the exception of 2 men left in charge of the horses in the draw, would filter into Main Street as unobtrusively as possible, moving through the back doors of saloons and pool halls, sauntering casually forth from dusty, sun-baked alleys. 5 picked men, with a leader in command, would gather at each bank. The balance of the crew would take up their positions at strategic points dominating the street. A single gunshot would be the signal for the attack. The street would be cleared, and each bank would be raided simultaneously. The forces would then converge upon Hampton's, where Sanders himself would be in command, and an orderly retreat to the horses would be effected. A final, sinister detail emerged in the outlaw's last instructions to his crew. Cold-bloodedly, as always, Sanders's reptilian nature showed its fangs. It was brought out, almost as a casual last word, that 2 cases of 60% dynamite had been smuggled into town by one of Sanders's lieutenants. This high explosive, covered by a filthy old horse blanket, was currently reposing in a weed-infested vacant lot adjacent to Hampton's bank. "Dynamite?" questioned one of the men, his voice tight with confusion. "What for, Chief?" "I will tell you what for," said Sanders, his voice a low snarl. "It is a little private grudge I have nursed for the past 25 years. Against this stuffed shirt, Hampton. He knifed me in the back once. Never mind how. But it is a long lane that never turns. Does he think I have forgotten? No, by the eternal. Cleaning out his vault is not enough for me. When we are through, I am going to blast his penny ante bank into kingdom come. He laughed at me once. Let him laugh that off." Rip, who was standing beside him, spoke deliberately, his voice cutting through the tense silence. He neither knew nor cared whether his words would precipitate a crisis. He had no plan. But his raw, burgeoning hatred of the man and all that he stood for rose up within him like a red tide. "I know what that grudge is, Sanders," he said. "Hampton was a young banker then. He persuaded a couple of ace-high young fellows to quit you and go straight. He lent them the money to back their play. Their names were Carruthers and Clanton. He looked the outlaw full in the face, his own expression a mask of contempt. You had best forget your grudges, Sanders." The outlaw whirled like a striking rattler, his hand a rigid claw hovering above the butt of his gun. Rip faced him, grinning, poised, ready. Their gazes locked and held. A moment stretched, taut as a wire. Then Sanders, looking past him, shook his head in an all but imperceptible motion. Rip heard the soft, metallic rasp of several weapons being eased back into their holsters behind him. "What is your play, Campbell?" The outlaw spoke softly, his voice dangerously low. And in the same breath, as though sensing the danger of further debate, he said, "Never mind. We will discuss it later, after the job. Now then, men, have you got it straight? Take no chances. Drop any armed citizen on sight. Shoot to kill. Protect the men carrying the gold at all costs. You all know where the relay horses are waiting. You know where we meet for the split. All right, you salty gents, scatter." The 2 blocks comprising the business section of Lodgepole, at mid-forenoon, were all but deserted. A few horses hitched to buckboards dozed at the rails near the distant courthouse square, their tails flicking at flies. Shirt-sleeved proprietors stood in the doorways of their respective places of business, their faces turned south, alert for the latest news from the supposed battlefield at Placer. Those citizens still remaining after the general exodus were congregated in small, buzzing groups, engaged in excited debate. It was as though the thundering hoofbeats of the departing riders and their exultant yells still re-echoed down the sunlit street. Certain strangers began to join these groups. They appeared unobtrusively, sauntering from adjacent alleys. They sidled into the outskirts of the crowds, attracting no particular attention. In the palaces of refreshment along the street, new cash customers appeared as if from nowhere, leaning on the long bars and calling carelessly for service. The ranks of the usual pool hall loafers gained new recruits unnoticed. The town marshal, delivering his expert opinion on the Placer battle from an up-tilted chair at the livery stable door, was flattered by the rapt interest of two unrecognized persons who leaned against the post at his side, nodding in courteous agreement. Thus, in a matter of minutes, the stage was set. Hampton's Bank, the pride of Lodgepole, was one of the town's 5 brick buildings. Its massive doorway was framed by huge, imposing marble pillars. On either side of this main entrance were 2 lesser doors, through which, prior to the official opening for business, customers passed into a small anteroom and so through swinging doors into the ornate lobby. Clanton and Pike entered first. They were followed, a moment later, by Slick. Then came the girl, and lastly Sanders and Rip. Slick pushed through the inner swinging door and held it open for the girl. At that same moment, Sanders, still in the anteroom, motioned Rip back. Outside, Rip Campbell, he spoke sibilantly as though through clenched teeth. Looking past him, Rip met the girl's eyes. They were like dark pools of shadow against the sudden pallor of her face. She shook her head slightly, a frantic, almost imperceptible motion. Her breast was rising and falling to quick, shallow intakes of breath. She was standing with her hand thrust deep into the pocket of her leather jacket. Her pose was tense, her white teeth biting into her lower lip, and Rip knew then from the desperate warning emanating from her that he must not turn his back on Sanders. "Go on in, Joe," he said, his voice steady. She shook her head again. Sanders whirled upon her, then turned back to glare at Rip, his face a mask of fury. Beyond the inner doors, women clerks were looking at them curiously. Clanton and Pike were leaning against a high writing table, the former calmly rolling a cigarette. Slick still stood, his jaw set, holding the door open. "Go in then," muttered Sanders thickly. Turning, he strode out into the street and halted. Rip and the girl passed through, into the lobby. Slick stood watching Sanders, and in that brief moment the girl whispered in Rip's ear, her breath hot against his skin. "Oh, Rip, you are through, finished. Why did you not go? There is no escape now. Do you not want to live?" "I do," said Rip, his own voice a low murmur. "I found that out too late. I found plenty out too late. But I am doing this much for you, and for the world, Joe. I am taking Sanders with me." Her face was immobile, her lips white. "Please," she whispered, "let me help. Tell me what to do. I will stand by you." He shook his head. "No," he said. "It is just Sanders and me. You stay in the clear." Further parley was cut short, as Sanders's weapon roared deafeningly in the street outside. Inside the bank, everyone stood motionless, frozen in time. The machine gun clatter of typewriters and adding machines ceased abruptly. Banker Hampton, emerging from the vault with a tray of currency in his hand, halted in his tracks, his grizzled brows raised in surprise. Clanton's weapon leapt from its holster, as if by magic. His voice cut the sudden ringing silence like a knife. "Stay put, mister. Right where you are. Do not move." The banker stood statuesque, his only movement a slow lowering of his grizzled brows. A woman screamed, a high, thin, tearing sound. Simultaneously, both within and without the bank, chaos descended upon Lodgepole. Gunfire crashed in the street outside, coming from a dozen scattered points. Loud yells re-echoed, strident oaths, shouted warnings, the frantic beat of hurrying feet, all creating a terrifying babble of sound. More distant explosions came, muffled as if from behind walls. Sanders charged in through the swinging doors, a gun in each hand. He was a formidable and appalling figure, his jaw outthrust, his eyes gleaming with a mad light. Slick, Pike, and Clanton, grimly shoulder to shoulder, were holding the bank employees at bay. The women were huddled together like a flock of frightened quail. Two sallow-faced bookkeepers and a youthful teller stood pale and quaking, their hands raised high. Rip was against the wall at the right, his thumbs hooked in his belt. Opposite him stood the girl, Jo, her hands still thrust deep into the pocket of her leather jacket. Sanders surveyed the scene with a lightning glance and instantly assumed command. He said nothing to Rip, gave him no orders, disregarded him utterly. He leapt across the lobby, pushed through a swinging gate that led behind the tellers' cages, and faced banker Hampton. Slick and Pike followed at his heels. Clanton turned himself about slowly, his cold eyes now turned on Rip. At that instant, as if following a preconceived plan, 7 or 8 of Sanders's shock troops rushed in from the street. The lobby was suddenly crowded with armed, dangerous men. 3 of these joined Sanders and his lieutenants behind the counter. 2 posted themselves at the door. The others scattered to strategic points, their guns covering every corner of the room. "You, Hampton," said Sanders. "You remember me, eh?" Shorty Dever. The banker's grim face became more deeply lined, his expression hardening into one of pure loathing. Sanders dashed the tray of currency from his hand, the bills fluttering to the floor like dead leaves. He pressed the muzzle of a weapon against the banker's chest and pushed him back. "Stand there," he directed. "Watch the parade go by. And sweat. I am collecting heavy interest today, Hampton." He leaped back, keeping one weapon trained on the banker. With the other, he motioned toward the vault. Inside, he directed the trio beside him. "Drag out the loot. You, Slick and Pike, herd the ladies out. These white-collared heroes also." His contemptuous gesture included the terrified bookkeepers and the youthful teller. A new and brazen clamor suddenly arose above the din outside. Whether the 3 outlaws who had entered the vault had set off some hidden alarm, or one of the apparently terrified employees had surreptitiously pressed a button, could not be determined. But a loud ringing gong burst forth in a staccato, sustained, nerve-shattering note. It added a quickened, frantic tempo to the uproar and to taut nerves like the wild beating of jungle drums. "That is Campbell yonder, Hampton," Sanders gloated, his voice rising above the din. "You know him, Rip Campbell. He showed us the way around. He is my right-hand man. He is part of the interest, too, Hampton. It was a haywire investment you made, what?" Plain enough was the fact that not gold alone, but the slacking of vengeful thirsts that had festered for years made these moments climactic for Sanders. And it was as though his very malignancy, in his wild intoxication of triumph, turned some invisible scale against him. For the grizzled banker, who had seen many dawns flame on the frontier, had also faced death before. Long ago, in his youth, he had pitted his resources against Shorty Dever. He did so now, though the attempt on the face of it was sheer bloody suicide. The 3 outlaws were approaching from the interior of the vault, their arms laden with currency and heavy sacks of gold. The banker was standing some 2 paces distant. Notwithstanding that Sanders's weapon was trained directly upon his breast, that he stood alone in a room crowded with desperate men to whom human life meant nothing, he hurtled forward in a sudden, explosive effort. Sanders's gun roared. Stricken in mid-leap, the banker's bulk carried him on. The polished steel door of the vault clanged shut. Falling, Hampton's clutching hand spun the numbered dial. He slumped to the marble floor, his head sagging, a dark stain spreading across his chest. "Judas?" breathed a voice raw with shock. "The vault is closed." Chapter 11. Sanders stood crouching over the body of the banker. His drooping mustache curved back from his teeth in an animal-like leer of pure rage. For a long, terrible instant, it appeared that he would send slug after slug crashing into Hampton's inert body, emptying his guns into the man who had defied him. Then, with a visible effort of will, he slid his weapons back into their holsters. He whirled upon Slick and Pike, who had just returned from escorting the terrified bank employees into the street. "Get the dynamite." His voice was a thin, rasping sound, like metal scraping on stone. The pair charged forth without a word. All about the big marble-floored room, men looked at each other, their faces hard and unblinking, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder and fear. "Listen, Chief," said Clanton, his voice tight. "What is the play?" "There's 200,000 in there," Sanders grated, his eyes fixed on the sealed vault door. "Do you understand? 200,000. This blasted citizen has passed out. Does he think he can checkmate me now? We will split this vault like a sardine can. We will blow the whole building to blazes and take the loot from the ruins. You and you trundle that safe over here. Upset it against the door." In the madness of the moment, all vestige of reason had forsaken the outlaw crew. They leapt to obey Sanders's command, their movements frantic and uncoordinated. Only Clanton's voice was raised in protest. "Wait," he shouted above the din. "You are loco, Chief. There are 3 of our fellows in there." "To blazes with them," snarled Sanders. "We have got no time for kid gloves. They took their chances on this job. So did you. So did I. They lost. That loot in there is more than half the jackpot. Right over here, Slick. Easy, Pike, that is dynamite. Ease them in between the safe and the door. Now you wait." Clanton insisted, his voice strained to the breaking point. "I am with you, Sanders, but this is going too far. 2 of those fellows are family men. Take a vote on it." "Vote for nothing." Sanders was all but foaming at the mouth, spittle flying from his lips. "Who made a plaster saint out of you, Clanton? You would see your best friend boiled in oil for 1/10 of that jackpot. Are we going to take chances with the noose and not get the loot? No, by the eternal." A roar of agreement, bestial and inhuman, drowned out Clanton's protest. Sanders tore aside the loose top of the upper box of explosive. Here was revealed a coiled fuse already capped. He drew this forth in a long green spiral, produced a match with a shaking hand, and struck it on the side of the heavy safe. "Outside, quick!" he commanded hoarsely, waving the tiny, sputtering flame aloft. "Get in the clear. It is a 40-second fuse. When she blows, rush back and dig into the ruins." Rip, while all were intent upon the grim drama unfolding at the vault, had leapt the counter and approached from the right. He had had no plan of action a moment before. Now the way was clear and plain before him. He wagered all on a single desperate throw of the dice. "Stop!" His voice, sharp and cold as ice, halted the general movement toward the door. All of them, outlaws caught in their own frenzy, halted to look back. All stood transfixed. Rip stood opposite Sanders, a gun in his hand. The weapon was not directed at Sanders. Its black muzzle was trained squarely upon the 2 boxes of dynamite, wherein immeasurable destructive forces awaited release. The clicking of the hammer, as he raised it with his thumb, was unnaturally loud in the momentary ringing silence. "Stay put, fellows," he said, his voice calm. "1 slug in this dynamite, and we are all reaching for a harp. Do not move, anybody. You know me, hombres. Even if you drilled me, I would surely pull the trigger." He addressed the room, but his eyes never left Sanders. "Get in the clear, Joe." Travel, and keep going. Drop that match, Sanders. If you feel lucky, draw. No man living, save Rip Campbell himself, could have thus dominated that scene. There were outlaws of proven caliber in that room, men who had faced death a dozen times. Yet all of them, having seen Rip face Sanders's rifle without so much as a quiver of an eyelash, now stood like frozen statues. Sanders himself, whose courage was as cold and emotionless as that of a reptile, made no move. The match burned down, blackened, and fell away from his trembling fingers. "Get going, Joe," Rip urged, his voice tight. "Remember those green fields over yonder." But the girl did not go. She stood pale and poised, her hands gripping the marble counter at her back so hard her knuckles were white. New turmoil arose outside. Running feet beat a loud, frantic tattoo on the wooden sidewalks. Gunfire from the north and south came nearer and clearer. Answering shots roared forth from the threshold of the bank. Bursting through the doorway, their retreat covered by the shock troops converging from up and down the street, came the looters from the other two banks. They were burdened with heavy bags of gold and currency. 3 of their number were wounded, and were all but dragged inside by their comrades. "Let us go, Chief," roared one of the frenzied newcomers. "Things are getting too hot. An army of old-timers and loco kids are closing in. We have got to make a run for it." "Key down," counseled a shaken voice from behind a pillar. "Do you see Sanders and Campbell? Behind that safe is enough dynamite to blow us clean across the Jordan. And Campbell is hog wild." There came to Rip, at that instant, a dazzling and incredible possibility. Because 3 helpless men were entombed like rats in the vault, he had leapt in to hasten the inevitable showdown between himself and Sanders. He had hoped, by using the dynamite as a threat, to forestall being dropped by a dozen bullets before he could close with his arch-enemy. Now, with the lobby crowded with the entire outlaw band, he glimpsed a daring, desperate coup. The delay had given the citizens time to assemble. If he could control the situation for just a few moments longer, until the bank entrance was fully guarded, there would be no escape. All of them would be entrapped behind barred windows and walls of stone. "You are bluffing," said Sanders, licking his lips, his eyes darting around the room. "You could not do it." Joe would go too. The fuse slipped from his hand. His fingers remained outspread. Rip saw a grim, murderous purpose gathering in his eyes. "Never mind me, Rip." The girl's voice was trembling, but resolute. "I am with you. Play it to the end." "Yes, Sanders," said Rip, nodding slowly. "It is just a bluff. You have seen me out on a limb before. The question is, are you going to call?" The plate glass of the main entrance crashed inward before a vicious, sustained fusillade. The deaf Campbell at the door shrank back, cursing. All those in the lobby scattered for cover, vaulting behind marble counters, taking their stand behind the soaring pillars that supported the high ceiling. Only Sanders and Rip stood fast. A bullet flattened on the safe between them, its fragments spattering against the wall and ceiling like angry wasps. "What do you want from us, Campbell?" came Clanton's hoarse voice from behind a desk. "Name it quick." From the tail of his eye, Rip saw Banker Hampton struggle up to a sitting position, supporting himself on his good arm. How long he had lain thus, in a pretended stupor, could not be said. It was his voice, hard-bitten and matter-of-fact, that finally made the reply. "The show is over, men. Give yourselves up peaceably. You have not got a Chinaman's chance. If you thought Rip was bluffing, what about those citizens out yonder? The safe protects the dynamite for now, but what is going to happen when they start firing through the windows? You, Shorty, Sanders, use your head. The game is up. Raise your hands. Hurry. Take his guns, one of you fellows." "Rip! Rip!" The girl's scream came piercingly, a sharp blade of warning, but it was too late. The slightest slackening of attention on Rip's part, and Sanders had struck. It was incredible that a human hand could move so fast. Rip had only to raise the muzzle of his gun with a flick of his wrist, yet both weapons roared as one, the two explosions blending into a single, deafening concussion that shook the room. Under an impact that felt as though a flaming sword had been driven through him, Rip fell back and down. Sanders pitched forward against the safe. He clung to it for a long instant, his legs buckling, seeking vainly to raise his weapon again. But even his undying, venomous hate could not give him sufficient strength. His head sagged, and he slumped slowly to the marble floor, a dead weight. Chapter 12. The shocking, tearing power of the heavy-caliber bullet, ripping through Rip's right shoulder, had shut off light and life like the abrupt drawing of a black curtain. Time and an awareness of things simply ceased to exist. But deep within him, in those mysterious, stubborn compartments of the human brain whose functions cease only with the last final heartbeat, a species of raw momentum built up by his iron purpose carried him on and on. He had not seen Sanders fall, so instant and absolute had been the halting of his consciousness. He knew nothing of what followed in the chaotic, smoke-filled bank. Thus, as he struggled up and up through a deep well of blackness, it was as though he still stood at that grim crossroads, calling upon all his resources of stamina and resolution to stand fast, to close his mind to all the belated sweet promise of life, to play out his losing hand to the bitter end at any cost. Again and again, in an endless, fevered sequence, he faced Sanders eye to eye, while between them crouched the giant, sleeping forces of the dynamite, capable of shattering the massive building like a house of cards, of sending all within it reeling forth like wind-blown dust. Once more, and always too late, he read Sanders's final, maniacal purpose. The girl's scream re-echoed in the darkness of his mind. He was pierced through and through by a bolt of pure fire. He had failed. He was falling. He glimpsed a stark, white-walled room, and a white-jacketed figure bending over him, the face a featureless blur. There was a window through which a rectangle of painful sunlight flooded, and beside it, in a recumbent position in a wheelchair, was a bulky person whose own features blurred, merged into, and were lost again in the engulfing darkness. Again, eons later, he opened his eyes in time to see the white-coated doctor closing the door softly behind him. Immediately upon that official's departure, the man at the window delved into the pocket of his bathrobe, and with an appearance of great and profound guilt, drew forth a huge black cigar. He lighted this, blew a thick blast of acrid smoke through the open window, and peered owlishly at Rip. It was Hampton, the banker. "We have raised up a milk-fed generation," observed that hard-bitten old-timer, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Soft as putty. I get a slug through my shoulder and think nothing of it." He waved his cigar, winced, and profanely shifted his heavily swathed torso to a more comfortable position. "At least not much. You are drilled in the same manner, plus a rib or two, and maybe a punctured lung or some such trifle, and what happens? 2 doctors for repairs and renovations. 5 nurses, and a whole barrel of ether to hold you down while they operate. 2 hours for you to snap out of it. Not so good, eh?" He grinned, mouthing his cigar. "How are tricks, Rip?" But Rip did not reflect his genial mood. "Where has Sanders gone?" he asked, his voice a weak, papery whisper. "Sanders," said the banker, "has gone to his final reward. That is one job you did right, son. His shot was quick, but yours was straight." "Yes," he nodded with deep, grim complacency, "Shorty is gone. And for his own sake, I hope he does not meet up with your dad or King Colton over yonder." "Where's Joe?" "Waiting for a chance to get at you. But I spoke first. The doc says I can chin with you for 5 minutes, no more." He snorted. What is the world coming to, when a little hefty conversation will put a pair of tough customers like us down and out. Where is the gang? In the hoosegow. And what a roundup that was. The bullpen is crowded to the rafters. With their retreat cut off, and that dynamite ready to pop under their noses, they caved in a hurry. The fellows holding the horses in the draw were also nailed. Every man jack of them is corralled, except that lad Clanton. When they were being marched down to the jail, he cut out of the herd and made a run for it. Right in front of the courthouse. Leapt on a horse and started for the tall timber. Bullets whistled all around him. They might just as well have been horseflies. Some wild-eyed fellows undertook to run him down, but it seems they had a relay string cached out yonder, ready for a quick getaway. So he thumbed his nose in their faces and faded out of the picture. Just as well, said Rip. Clanton was the whitest man of the crew. Yes, strength to his arm. Mr. Hampton. He licked his lips and strove to speak with some resolution. But the iron was no longer in him, and his voice trembled. I have got nothing to say for myself. But I want to put in a word for Jo. She was not in that crew, of her own free will. She was kidnapped and forced to ride with them. That is enough, said the banker. You do not have to tell me anything. I have already got the picture. The girl has told the whole story. To me, and to District Attorney Powell. Yes, she is in the clear. As for you. He looked hard at Rip, his eyes sharp. Get a hold of yourself and hang on. I have got a jolt to hand you that will shake your eyeteeth. Are you ready for it? You cannot jolt me, stated Rip apathetically. My eyeteeth are anchored down solid. In the last couple of days, I have been everywhere and seen everything. You do not have to tell me I am sunk, Mr. Hampton. Sunk without a ripple. The whole world knows I joined up with that gang, and why. They know I did it deliberately. Sure they do, the banker agreed, because that little girl Jo told me and District Attorney Powell all about it. And Powell told the world. It is already history. Get that, Rip. There is no use trying to alibi out of it now. Because you have waked up to find yourself famous, Rip. You are a cockeyed hero. What do you mean? Rip whispered, the room starting to swim. Listen. The other's harsh features split in a sudden, wolfish grin. This exultant leer passed. He lowered his voice and spoke in a confidential, conspiratorial vein. You are a poker player, Rip. I have likewise been around a little. So has Powell. You may know certain things. I may suspect plenty. Powell may have a hunch. But you and I know, and Powell knows, that a good bluff is sometimes worth more than a royal flush. Powell has got the whole gang under lock and key. He will send them up for a long stretch. That is all he is interested in. He is satisfied. The range is rid of the dangdest crew of cutthroats that ever cluttered up a decent community. So the valley is satisfied. Now then, if the girl explains your part in it, which immediately becomes as plain as the nose on your face as soon as she explains it, who are you to buck the deal? It is just one of those things to which a man has got to bow his head. It is the white man's burden. Got the picture? No, said Rip. What did Jo explain? It is shock-proof, said the banker. The facts speak for themselves. It is a natural. Here is a young man, Rip Campbell, who folks figure has a wild strain in him. This burns up the said Rip Campbell. It gripes him. Here is a crew of cutthroats, roosting up in the pinnacles. The said cutthroats have thumbed their noses at the law and flourished and fattened so that the whole country is roused up. Now then, this Rip Campbell is desperate. He has tried to shoot square and build up a reputation for himself as a decent citizen. He has failed. He is a high-strung lad, proud as Lucifer, and he gets to brooding over it. There are several other little details, such as a certain banker's daughter, that aggravates the state he is in. How to show the world that he is right and they are wrong. The answer hits him square between the eyes. Forthwith, without telling a soul of his intentions, while the rest of the valley is stewing and fretting and champing at the bit without getting anywhere, he saddles his horse, takes his guns, and rides up Suicide Trail. For what purpose? To play a lone hand, just like the cards fell, as follows. He tells the leader of this nest of polecats that he craves to be an outlaw, in a way which would have given his own dad a new slant on what a long chance really meant. He makes his bluff stick. He is taken into the gang. But he is under suspicion, you understand. The leader of the crew, who is as cold-blooded a snake as ever struck without rattling, has his doubts. The result is that from 1 to a half-dozen gunmen are riding herd on Campbell every second of the time, with orders to shoot to kill at the first suspicious move. Does this faze Campbell? Not at all. With his life not worth a plugged nickel, at any stage of the game he lays his plans. He finds out that this Lodgepole raid is coming up. Fine. He rides along. He does not know where he is going to head off this stampede, nor how. He is just waiting for his chance. He is a gambler, as everybody knows, and somewhere along the line his hunch tells him there will come a break. And all this while, you understand, he does not know whether or not he will reach Lodgepole alive. Riding into town, he is warned that the rattlesnake chief of those Apaches figures on leaving him on the job, toes up. Does he make a break for it while he still has a Chinaman's chance? No. He plays it to the end. The break comes in the bank, when a blamed fool of an old banker forgets how scared he is and slams the vault door shut. Sanders goes crazy and piles dynamite against the door. He could not have blown in the vault that easy. Any experienced safecracker would have told him that, but he would have wrecked it and the bank too. That is where Campbell steps in. Deliberately, out-bluffing a gent who did not know what fear is and was loco besides, he held the fort long enough for what was left of the population of this easygoing and peaceable community to close in on the polecat's nest and cut off their retreat. And that is that. The last touch to the picture, the final star in his haywire crown, was the fact that this hero Campbell played out his hand to the last card. He fell with his gun smoking and took Sanders with him. It rounded out the deal with the kind of flourish that goes rolling down the halls of time. And if there is a buckaroo in this whole high country who would not give his right arm to be in your shoes right now, he is not among the herd that is milling down there on the street. If there is a backbiting and whispering citizen who ever speaks out in his dreams and says that Rip Campbell is anything else than the squarest, whitest, and most upstanding lad west of the Mississippi, the unfortunate maverick's hide will be posted at the nearest crossroads, with the scalp and ears missing. At least, the banker concluded, fastidiously flicking the ash from his cigar on the windowsill, that is the way those near-sighted, hero-worshipping shorthorns figure it. As for me, I will just say this, seeing that we are all alone, and I have known you since you were a foal, and your father before you, that when it comes to fellows who are positively reeking with luck, I am backing Campbell. Rip relaxed upon his pillow, his eyes half closed while the white room circled majestically about him. He tried to think, to grasp the incredible and undreamed of possibilities opened up by the other's words, but the effort at first was too great. Do not you get head up now, advised the banker in alarm. Get a hold of yourself, Rip. Doggone, my 5 minutes was up long ago. Where is that blasted bell? If you were to have a relapse now, there is a certain young lady who would have my scalp. And that is another thing. He hesitated, puffing furiously on his cigar. Few indeed were the occasions when Banker Hampton shrank from calling a spade a spade. Such an occasion was obviously upon him now. He cleared his throat in a deep-chested growl and clenched his teeth upon his cigar. "Rip," said he, "this comes hard. Here it is, all in a bunch. I crowded you off your quarter section over on Wolf Creek. On your account as much as Cora's. She is a fine girl, you understand. She is my daughter, even if her ma has weaned her away from the trails I savvy and taught her to run with a hi-hat crowd. But you would never have been happy with her. You could not see it then. I figured, maybe, that you would live to thank me for it. I never dreamed it would send you up suicide trail." "It is all right," said Rip. He grinned feebly. "Doggone, that was years and years ago." "Just wanted to say that the quarter is yours," said the banker hastily. "Pay for it when you like. Take as long as you like. If you need more backing, it is waiting for you. Your credit is good. Well, it sounds like the gal is coming to trundle this baby carriage away. I will see you later, son." "Just a second," pleaded Rip, rousing himself. "Send up Joe, Mr. Hampton. Just for a couple of minutes." "Ridiculous," scoffed the banker. "And have you swooned plumb away? It is not in the cards. Get a hold of yourself, cowboy. You just lay there in royal ease and count your blessings. You will be lucky if you see her in a week." But his wolfish grin, as the nurse wheeled him away, all but linked his shaggy ears, and Rip relaxed, confident and content. He turned his head to face the window. Despite his utmost efforts, a pleasant, warm lethargy enveloped him. He was not asleep, nor yet fully awake. And from that luxurious borderland of dreams, the girl did not attempt to call him back. Rather, in spirit, she joined him there. She closed the door softly and stole to his side. Her hand crept into his. No words were spoken to reaffirm the manner in which fate had linked their destinies together. No words were needed. In the quiet of the sunlit room, they looked forth upon the smiling range where life's dusty sunlit trails, threading through green pastures, beckoned fair and far.